And welcome back to We're the People. This is your host, Jason and Alexia Preston. We got a very important show today, and one that I'm going to encourage you to share, but more importantly, stick with, especially past the first 15, 20, 30 minutes. It starts off a little slow. It starts off a little bit benign, some of these things we're talking about, because we're talking about secret societies. And I think what starts off is a conversation that doesn't seem so significant by the end of this show, that I think is going to change you as an individual. You're going to see some things that are going to shake you, challenge you to the core. But I think any person with an honest heart, as they go through this, is going to see that there are some things that there is no question are not right and are not okay. Well, Alexia, any thoughts that you want to add before we jump into it?
No, we're always so honored to have Justin Riggs join us as an incredible researcher and presenter. And if you go back and you look at some of Justin's old shows that he's done with us, you'll see certain patterns coming up and just follow that thread. Just pull that thread and see if you've seen the past shows, or maybe go back and rewatch some of the past shows, or even if you're new here, I think this will start putting some of those bigger puzzle pieces together for you.
Yeah, because I think one of the things is going to have, again, every now and then we do a show, and I guess I think I have an idea of what's we're going into before we start, and then by the time we're done, I have like a very different perspective. And this is one of those shows, and which is why we're filming the intro afterwards. But this is a show that's going to really make you think, and I think it's important that you do think, that you do start thinking about your own compass, about what is true, and and if you see something out of alignment with what you've thought that the way things were, can you be true to yourself? Because this is a show that's going to be very difficult, for people to see some of the things that you will see. But I think it's essential. But it'll test you to the core. So I don't want to even say enjoy the show, because it's not enjoyable. It's just, these are hard things. But I'll go ahead and we'll flip back to the beginning. But just appreciate you guys and all that you do. And welcome back to We Are the People. This is your host, Jason and Alexia Preston, back again from our non-Utah
That's
location.
a good way to put it.
But sometimes,
Anywhere but here location.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And the longer we're in this fight, the more we want out of Utah.
Yes.
It's been crazy.
Sad
It's
but
been
true.
crazy. But no, we want to thank you guys. We have the greatest love and appreciation for everybody out there who's part of this community, who's standing up for children, who's standing up against abuse, who's demanding accountability, who's not putting their head in the sand and not um, willing to look the other way in times of darkness. I just have the greatest respect for survivors who are coming out and having the courage to tell their story after, spending their whole lives being told that, re-victimized, and finally, they're coming out in numbers. They're coming out, and they're waking us to the awful situation which we are finding ourselves in.
You just said something really interesting that I think is worth mentioning, because this comes up a lot in the comments about why don't they just go to the police? Why don't they just lawyer up? Do you know how hard it is for people to speak up to begin with, for the survivors to come forward, to find someone that they can trust? So every time they tell the story, especially to someone they don't trust, could put them at risk and also potentially re-victimize them. They have to relive those stories again. So although they have protective instincts, I think we need to give a lot of grace to these survivors that are brave enough to come forward and support them. And I think that is something that we can do as a community, especially as you're all viewers out there trying to figure out your place. I think that giving them that space and that room to tell their stories, and not be so harsh to judge why this hasn't made it through the judicial system or the police. There are a lot of things going on in the background. We'll tell you that much right now. It's bad as all we're at liberty to talk about. But stay tuned, be patient, and give space to these survivors because it's important, both what you see on camera and also what you don't see off camera.
Especially when we know we have a 3% conviction rate. So I mean, when there is almost no chance of getting justice, even for those who do report, it's atrocious. It's atrocious. And knowing what we know, what's happening in this world, what's going on with Epstein, how corrupt this country is, how corrupt this world is, the darkness that is there. I just have the greatest love and respect for all of you for being involved and for trying and choosing to take a stance, because these are difficult things. And I hear, some people say, well, what can we do? And I just say, that's what can you do? You can stand, you can speak, but I'll tell you what you cannot do is put your head in the sand, because silence in the face of evil is evil. There are dragons, there are horrific things happening, and dragons grow in the darkness. And when we refuse to confront them, when we refuse to shine the light of accountability on them, those things get worse and more children suffer. Glenn Pace came out in 1990 and exposed this happening at almost every level in the church, and we as a church collectively decided to put our heads in the sand and ignore it. And now we are dealing with uh, with the consequences of that. We're dealing with the consequences of now the abuse that has gone from one level to metastasizing. And so, anyways, I appreciate you saying that, Alexia. Uh,
I think that's a good segue to today's show. So we recently just re-released the Tom Stallings case in light of some of the viral social media clips that have resurfaced from the testimony of the mothers in West Virginia. And even though that case is not new and did have some justice, a lot of the cases that we've been hearing about and a lot of the survivor stories we've been hearing about don't make it very far. And a lot of the questions that you might ask is why? Why don't these cases get very far? Why is this not widely known? Why is this not widely publicized in the media? And I think the backstory to a lot of that is that we do have a state and a country that is run by so-called secret combinations and secret societies. So who better to kind of walk us through this but our very own Justin Riggs, who's become not just an expert to our show, but also is making the rounds on various podcasts. So, Justin, we're just so honored to have you back here today to talk about this really, really important conversation on secret societies. It's things we've alluded to in the past in some of your prior presentations, and we can link them in the show notes below. But you've put together a great presentation to walk us through some of these topics so we understand what's going on and why some of these things just never come to light.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again, guys. It's been a while, so I'm grateful to be back. I really love, what you guys both said here, and I really appreciate what Jason said about when people come to us and ask, "What can we do?" And I want everybody to know that at the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about that explicitly from a faithful Latter Day Saint perspective. And I know that I was excommunicated from the church, but I consider myself a disciple of Jesus Christ, and I want to talk about what can we do because I'm getting more and more people coming and asking that same question to me. So, along those lines, what you were saying, Alexia, is true. What I want to do is I want to put out a hypothesis today based on historical data about why we see it's so difficult for this topic of ritual abuse to be covered fairly. It's so difficult for people to get justice. It's so difficult to even tell your story without being hounded and harassed by even members of the church, right? And so today I shared out my screen here and I have a presentation like I normally do. And today I've called my presentation from eternal to fraternal, understanding the roots of ritual abuse in Utah. And before I get started, I do just want to point out that this is just a hypothesis, okay? But it is based on historical data. And what I'm hoping is that it will provoke discussion. It certainly did that. I was lucky enough to go on the Imagination podcast with Emma, and we talked about this topic. And boy, out there on Instagram and on TikTok, these clips have sort of blown up. And so I'm hoping that it will trigger some really good conversation. I want to start by talking about. I'm going to try to talk as much as I can, like from the perspective of a faithful LDS member. And so, like when I say that I'm talking about a prophetic warning on conspiracy, for the sake of this conversation, we're going to assume that LDS prophets can be prophetic. Okay. And I know that every time I do a show and I try to do that, there'll be people in the comments who say it was a con from the beginning. How can you possibly this, that, blah, blah, blah. But for the sake of a conversation, we have to have some axiomatic premises. And so for today, we're going to take this conversation as though we're an active member of the church, and we're going to examine some historical data and ask ourselves some questions. So to start today, we're going to talk about a prophetic warning that was given in on April 6th of 1886. And this is the first presidency epistle that nobody ever talks about. You can find it in the Journal of George Q. Cannon, and he says this is him and John Taylor and Brother Richards wrote this epistle, but it's stored in the Journal of George Q. Cannon, and they say this is read in general conference, okay, in April of 1886. The scenes which we are now witnessing in this territory are the result of a deep laid and carefully planned conspiracy, which has been in process of formation for years. Its originators knew the elements they had to deal with, and by cunning contrivance, they have effected a wonderful combination. Religious and irreligious, ministers in sacerdotal robes and atheistic scoffers, businessmen of integrity and blacklegs, temperance men and drunkards, men of strict morality and pimps and harlots are crowded together on the platform they have constructed, and they find no inconvenience from each other's companionship. Each is made to believe that it is to his direct interest to combine to destroy Mormonism. A more motley collection of human beings was never witnessed. Okay? So if we believe that Mormon prophets can be prophetic, the question here is, in this epistle, were the Mormon prophets being prophetic? And if so, were the conspirators successful in overthrowing Mormonism as the prophets were saying that they were trying to? Let's look at a couple more quotes from this epistle and see what kinds of things the church was worried about in 1886. This says, in Idaho territory, the usurpations of the officers have gone from bad to worse. They there out Herod in that disregard of the people's liberties. One of the latest movements has in view the revocation of all certificates given to school teachers who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ, which means the placing of our children, by the help of our taxes, under the tuition of those who would gladly eradicate from their minds all love and respect for the faith of their fathers. The duty of our people under these circumstances is clear. It is to keep their children away from the influence of the sophisms of infidelity and the vagaries of the sects. Okay, so one of the things that the brethren were worried about is that the education system was, there was an attempt to overthrow the education system. And they were really warning the members of the church about making sure that their children were educated properly by members of the church. Okay, I want people to hold on to that for a second, because we're going to talk about what actually happened. Here's another quote from the epistle. It says, many of the young of both sexes, when all was peace and no war was made upon their parents and friends, seemed to be of the opinion that they could, without any danger to themselves or their faith, be in full fellowship with the world. The names Latter-day Saint and Gentile were alike to them. They appeared to see no reason why they could not be on terms of perfect friendship with both classes. Every Latter-day Saint of experience knows how dangerous it is for children to stand upon this ground. But from this delusive dream, they have been awakened by the rude shock of this persecution. The line of demarcation between the Latter-day Saints and the world has been drawn so sharp and distinct that they find themselves, unless they become open apostates, compelled to take sides with their parents and friends, and the difference between their religion and that which is opposed to it is brought home to their hearts and consciences with a force never before known to them. And then it goes on and it says, they are learning the truth of the words of the Savior by the painful experience which our enemies are now giving them. If you were of the world would love his own. But because ye are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. So another thing that the first presidency of the church was warning members of the church in general conference was about making friends with the Gentiles, right? Seeing no difference between Latter-day Saints and Gentiles. And they talk about how dangerous and delusional that belief is. The last part of that epistle that I want to read is this. It says, and while we should impress upon the rising generation as qualities of incalculable worth, that they should be pure in their morals and have a high standard of honor, of truth, virtue, and integrity, that they should be obedient to their parents and their God, and cherish a reverence for everything holy, be loyal to their country, and respect all constitutional laws. So the last thing that the first presidency, not the last thing, but the things that I chose out, the last thing that the first presidency wanted to remind the members is to be pure in their morals and to have a high standard of honor, truth, virtue, and integrity. So again, that's in 1886. We're going to hop forward 10 years, and approximately 10 years later, as everybody knows, Utah became a member of the United States of America. They received statehood on January 4th, 1896. In order to do that, we've talked about multiple times on this show and on other shows, there were some real compromises that had to be made by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in order to receive statehood. And those largely centered around polygamy and slavery, and those kinds of things. And so, but they made those compromises. And so the remainder of today's program is really going to talk about what happened after Utah statehood, and did the saints follow the counsel of the first presidency from the epistle in 1886. Okay. Now, when we talk about conspiracies, we always want to have 2 or 3 witnesses whenever we try to establish anything. That's a scriptural pattern. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall all things be established. And so in 1916, 20 years later, after they got statehood, John A. Widtsoe, who was the president of the University of Utah and would become a Mormon apostle, writes about his experience while he was president of the University of Utah. So sometime around 1916, he says, "It was actually shocking when I accidentally overheard 2 non-Mormon regents, among the most eminent men of the state, conversing upon this subject. Said one, 'We must take over the university and train the young people away from Mormonism.'" Okay, I'm going to stop there for 1 second, because what did the first presidency warn the church about? They warned the church about the educational system being overtaken. And then 30 years later, John A. Widtsoe witnesses 2 non-Mormon regents literally saying, "We must take over the university and train the young people away from Mormonism." "Yes," answered the other, "you are right. That's our next job, to secure full control of the institution, secure a non-Mormon president and teachers, and educate the students away from Mormon beliefs." Okay, hold on to that. Educate the students away from Mormon beliefs. I want you to think about how you can do that inside of a university. What's the most effective way to educate students away from Mormon beliefs? This man then says, "The state will then be ours." So it wasn't just a matter of overthrowing Mormonism. They wanted full control of the state. John Widtsoe says, "For the moment at least, these men forgot their oath of office as regents of the university. Or was it just for the moment?" Okay, so we now have multiple witnesses that there's a conspiracy, including overhearing people. So John Widtsoe doesn't name the people, but we know exactly who they were, and I'm going to name them right now. This is about that year 1916. There's a historical event that took place where they were trying to get rid of Mormon President Kingsbury. Okay, this says, "In January 1916, rumors began to emerge among the Board of Regents of a movement to remove Kingsbury. After several board members spoke privately to him, he voluntarily submitted his resignation. Immediately after Kingsbury's resignation," and this says Simon Bamberger, but I don't think it's Simon Bamberger. I think it's Ernest Bamberger, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it is a Bamberger, okay? And the Bambergers are Utah Jews who came from Bavaria. They're Ashkenazi Jews who came from Germany to Utah and had a large amount of success establishing themselves as political and educational leaders inside the state. So anyway, Bamberger, a member of the board who was not a member of the church, moved to appoint a committee to search for a new president. In response, Waldemar Van Cott, one of the board's Latter-day Saint members, moved immediately to appoint John A. Widtsoe, president of the Utah Agricultural College, as the new president of the University of Utah. 4 of the regents immediately protested. Widtsoe was a known and respected scholar in the educational community, but he was also a devout member of the church, and his brother Osborne was at the heart of the recent controversy. The board split along ecclesiastical lines, with regents Bamberger, Armstrong, and Whitmore, none of whom were Latter-day Saints, voting against the measure. So in 1916, there were originally 3 non-member members of the Board of Regents. It goes on to say, N.T. Porter, a Latter-day Saint, also joined them. Nevertheless, the protesting board members were outvoted 6-4, and Whitso was appointed. Regents Armstrong and Bamberger later issued a formal statement protesting the vote. So the two regents that John Whitso later overheard talking about overthrowing the university by getting a non-member president were the ones who voted against Whitso becoming president of the university as they were trying to remove Kingsbury. Okay, so that all lines up like pieces of a puzzle. The reason we know that it was Armstrong and Bamberger is because down below it says, the same day, Regent Whitmore, one of the dissenters, announced his resignation from the board. So there were only two members of the board of regents that were non-members. So we know who these conspirators were. And then we can start drawing out network maps of who their friends were and who these other conspirators were that the first presidency spoke about in 1886. Okay. So to end the introduction today, I just want to ask the question, what happens when an educational institution has conspirators inside of it that are trying to draw men away from the teachings of the church and secularize them? And I would suggest that perhaps one of the things that might happen is that through the Greek living system of the university, they might draw men away and then place them in positions of power, influence, and gain, and eventually overtake institutions of education, government, and ecclesiastical structures like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So, like, we can observe that in 2018, you can see that Sigma Chi Fraternity on Facebook posted the following. In case you missed it, Significant Sig Russell Nelson. So Significant Sig means that he won an award as a member of the fraternity Sigma Chi. So Significant Sig Russell Nelson, Utah, 1945, was named president of the Mormon Church. The 93-year-old Nelson is a former surgeon. Significant Sig and chapter brother Russell Ballard, 1947, was named acting president of the church's Quorum of the 12 Apostles, its second highest governing body. Okay. Now there's something really interesting in here, and I don't know the answer to it, but I do want to point it out. If you see, it says Significant Sig Russell Nelson, but it says Significant Sig and chapter brother Russell Ballard. And I do just want to point out for all those people who are interested in pursuing this further, there may be a difference. Now, my understanding is that you cannot get taken out of Sigma Chi. They can kick you out, and I'm going to show you this. You can be kicked out, but you can't remove yourself. But there, for some reason, they call Russell Nelson Significant Sig, but they call Russell Ballard Significant Sig and chapter brother. And what we see in the historical record is that Russell Ballard is active with Sigma Chi for the rest of his life. They have monthly parties there in Salt Lake. We know people who were at those parties. We know their children. They've told us a lot about those parties and that kind of thing. But Russell Nelson in the historical record seems to have backed away from Sigma Chi to the point of, in his autobiography, he says that he was ambivalent about his time as a fraternity brother and that there were many good things, but there were also things that were not desirable. So as we go forward, I do want to point out that potentially Russell M. Nelson may have backed himself out of Sigma Chi in many ways, shapes, and forms. But a fact remains, in 2018, both the president of the church and the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles were both fraternity brothers. So the next question that everybody wants to ask me when I talk about that is, well, who cares? What's the problem with LDS men being members of fraternities like Sigma Chi and Pi Kappa Alpha, and then clubs like Skull and Bones and Allen Key? So today, this is really the meat of the presentation. I want to go through and show you like why this is a problem. But first, we're just going to establish the historical record of when these clubs and fraternities showed up on campus. Okay.
Sure.
So,
And I feel like we covered some of this when we did that show. I think it was the Kingdom Divided show, where we can post a link to that old presentation. I know we talked about some of these concepts, but really appreciate you giving us a deeper dive into it today. I
yeah,
think I'm going to start calling you Professor Riggs. I'm
Professor
already
Riggs.
learning some new things. I never
That's
knew we
funny.
had such Jewish ties in our in Utah history, and that was news to me as well.
Yeah. So let's go
All
back to
these
that very
corrupt
quickly.
Jews. I don't know how that marry one.
I don't know. I'm not going there. I don't need APAC all over me, but I will just say this. The Bambergers had exceptional They were exceptionally successful. Simon Bamberger was the first and only Jewish governor of Utah right around this time. I think he got elected in 1917, if I remember. Ernest Bamberger is his nephew, and Ernest gets elected to some politics, but he's also on that board of regents. He's extremely powerful as a member of the community. And so the Bamberger family, I mean, there's still, I think it's a Bamberger Railroad and Bamberger Highway out there in Utah. So a major part of Utah history was these Ashkenazi Jews who migrated into Utah and found a lot of success. Um, okay, so very quickly, this part should go a little bit faster because it's just really laying the the foundation to show that these organizations were at the university. So if you went and you go to the University of Utah's website, they're going to say that fraternities didn't start at the University of Utah until 1909. But in reality, if you go back and look at the University of Utah yearbooks, you'll see that in 1905, a group called Delta Sigma was formed. It says, although the youngest fraternity in the university, that Delta Sigma does not lack the interest and fellowship necessary for a good organization. And it just talks about how it came into existence. And so we know that as early as 1905, Delta Sigma is on campus at the University of Utah. Most of those Delta Sigma gentlemen end up becoming Sigma Chi because Sigma Chi comes to town in 1909. And this is just a screenshot from that 1910 Utonian, which means it's for the events that happened in 1909. And you can see Sigma Chi fraternity, Beta Epsilon chapter. It gives the colors, it gives the flower, and it gives the symbol here. Okay. Right after Sigma Chi comes in, you can see that the way that they're advertising themselves is this way. And the question I want people to ask themselves is it appropriate for a priesthood holder in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to affiliate and associate with an organization like Sigma Chi or Pi Kappa Alpha? Okay. And I know that there are official church policies and practices and procedures. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But I want you just to look inside of your heart. And as we look at the evidence, ask yourselves whether it's appropriate for these men to affiliate with these types of groups. So in that year that Sigma Chi shows up, here is the homepage in the yearbook for frats. Do these look like Melchizedek priesthood holders to anybody? Men with pipes, right? Smoking. The next year,
I mean, what year was that? Because the word of wisdom is actually, that's a whole other conversation. Is the word of wisdom has really evolved recently from what it actually was. I mean, it went from something of
that's a great
wisdom
point.
and moderation and something I believe in what it originally was to something I completely think is meant to control and manipulate people now, that I don't believe in what it is, how it's practiced today.
That's a great point, and it's a great question. And Jason, that's the type of thing I hope people start talking about. And I hope they'll start talking to me about it. I hope they'll send me messages and say, "Hey, Justin, like in 1909, like was it really a big deal for men to smoke pipes in the church, or was the word of wisdom still forming?" Because the truth is, Jason, I don't know the answer to that question. I think we're far enough along into this that smoking pipes and drinking beer are frowned upon, but that's a question that I need to take as I continue to work out this hypothesis, and we need to answer those types of questions. Okay. So I'm just going to get, for my precision right now, I'm going to say that smoking pipes, and then you can see the next year, the homepage for the frats is a man with two large mugs of alcohol flying through the air. Okay. And I'm going
Oh,
to
that
say
looks like a frat
personally,
party.
yeah. So I'm going to say from my perspective, this is not a group of people that Melchizedek priesthood holders should be affiliating with. And then I just want to point out, like I just said, my how things have stayed exactly the same. And so if you go to Sigma Chi, University of Utah, if you go to their Instagram page and you just look at their Instagram page, this is one of the first pictures you're going to see. And it's just a guy with a Sigma Chi t-shirt and a guy with beer, and they're getting ready to drink again. And so this isn't the kind of thing where like, oh, in 1909 and 1910, it was this type of organization, but it's changed and now it's different. No, as we all know, fraternities are highly interested in these types of behaviors. And this is one of the reasons that I think that Melchizedek priesthood holders shouldn't be a part of these, or priesthood holders at all should be a part of these organizations. Okay. And we're going to get around to like more specific reasons, but those are some general reasons. So on the heels of Sigma Chi becoming a part of the University of Utah, Skull and Bones becomes a part. So this is the Unitonian of 1910 for the years of 1909. And they announced that Skull and Bones is merely a bunch of juniors, which was organized towards the close of school. The purpose of the club is to advance the general interests of the school in general and the junior class in particular, to break up antagonism between fraternities and between fratmen and those who do not belong to fraternities. The society is a secret one, and their ways are deep and mysterious. The members propose to establish such an organization in the class of 1911 next year with the hopes that it may live in the junior class forevermore. Okay, so we got Skull and Bones that showed up. I just want to point out.
By the way, and are you going to point out where Skull and Bones came from and the significance of that? Because I know you have a section of our. You are. Yeah, Alexia just found an interesting thing.
Well, we'll bring back. We're bringing back that.
I think bring it back. Bring it up now.
That seems off topic now.
Okay.
Well, let's just say, did you know that Bamberger was actually the one who started Lagoon?
Yes, he is the one who started Lagoon. That's right. So, and as part of that was part of the railroad system that he was developing with other church members, right? And so, like, one of the things people need to recognize is that, as in all other places, commerce was a major driver of secularization. And so there were Mormons who wanted to build railroads, there were Jews who wanted to build railroads, and they were working together. But yeah, Bamberger is the one who formed Lagoon. You're exactly
what
right.
we find most interesting about that, and also when you talk about these networks, whether it's railroads or such, we've had multiple survivor testimonies talking about things that have allegedly happened underground at Lagoon. So it's just one of those coincidences that we'll just leave with you to make of it which you will. Sorry, tangential.
That was interesting.
Very interesting.
No problem. Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to just say that this is the Skull and Bones that you're thinking of. Okay. Like, one of the biggest objections that I always get is that Yale Skull and Bones and University of Utah Skull and Bones are not the same, but we've really put that to bed. Okay. This is a picture, and on the left is Skull and Bones, Yale's insignia with the 322 number that everybody knows. My friend Ben McClintock has been researching this for a long time as well. And he actually had somebody from the University of Utah who was invited to join Skull and Bones, and this man gave him his invitation. So what you have on the right side here is an envelope. You can sort of see where the envelope opens up right here. And this is the wax seal that was on his invitation. And on that wax seal, you can see the numbers 322. Okay. You cannot use this insignia unless you are part of the Yale network. So the University of Utah was part of the Yale network. They use the same insignia with the numbers 322. And I'm going to show further evidence of this later on, but I just want to establish that right away. We are talking about the Yale Skull and Bones at the University of Utah.
And I think, sadly, Justin, I don't think most people know what goes on at Skull and Bones, whether it's Yale or Utah. But I mean, it's, you've got presidents, you have Bush who was involved in that. You've got, I think, Cheney, you got several of our presidents who've been involved over there, and they laying in coffins. There's some of the horrific things that go on in these things. You talk about
part of initiation rituals.
Their initiation ritual. I mean, it's this stuff. I don't know if you're going to be addressing that, but again, too many people, it's just these innocent things. And fraternities. And these are literally combinations. These guys come in same as these high-level Masons.
I'm pretty close. She was part of a team that successfully recorded part of the initiation ceremony that takes place in the tomb's courtyard.
Okay, you have the doorway here.
Yeah.
Okay, then to the right you have a hedge, and then you have an evergreen tree. If you follow that line straight back, courtyard's in there.
Ah, okay.
So
that's where they have the ceremonies in
the outdoor part of it. Part of it was indoor. So we only got to see the outdoor part.
Right.
We only got to, and to listen to the outdoor part. God only knows what went on indoors.
And what did you hear? What was it you managed to get this unique
it was disgusting. It was gross. I mean, they were pretending to murder people. And
what was the tone of it, though? Was it jokey? Or was it quite...
No, it wasn't jokey at all. It was sick. It's about the only way I can describe it. It was sick.
What you're hearing is the first recording ever made of the Skull and Bones initiation ceremony. It has never been broadcast before. 15 new members of the club are being introduced into the macabre rituals of Skull and Bones by the senior students who are about to graduate. The club has what some might see as a strange fascination with death, skulls and bones. There's the chants too, difficult to hear first of all, but including the devil equals death and death equals death.
Yes, exactly. Well, and we don't know a lot about Skull and Bones initiation, but what we do know is everything about Sigma Chi's initiation because WikiLeaks leaked that. And so, yeah, I'm going to spend most of the time today showing like the kinds of things that are happening. And then I want to talk about how if you look at Sigma Chi as kind of the minor leagues here, and if you look at Skull and Bones as the major leagues, you can only imagine if they're doing the types of things that we know are happening at the Sigma Chi level, then we can start to believe the kinds of things that we've heard about as it relates to the initiation of Skull and Bones. And then we can take it even further, and you get to the Hamblin ritual abuse situation. And it doesn't take too much imagination to understand that when you start people out young and you help them engage, or you not help them, but you force them to engage in ritual abuse to gain access to power, influence, and gain, well, then this slow ratcheting up of the types of abuse that are going on all of a sudden make the types of ritual abuse that you read in the Hamblin statements far more realistic than people can understand when you just kind of throw it on their plate and say, you've got to believe this is true, right? But we're going to spend a significant amount of time going through the ritual of Sigma Chi and showing again why it's so dangerous, in my opinion, for a member of the church to be affiliating with a group like that, okay? So really quickly, 1911, Alan Key shows up. That's the senior group for Skull and Bones. 1912, Pi Kappa Alpha, which was the second most powerful fraternity at the University of Utah, shows up. This is where Rotary International becomes a part of the story, and men like Stephen Covey were Pi Kappa Alpha, okay? Then there's a really important piece of this that people need to understand, because BYU did have fraternities. Like, I have had so many fights with people about this, but they did. And the biggest fraternity at BYU was a group called the Gold Brickers, or the Sam Hall Society. And they show up in 1917. And you can see here, this is a picture from their website, and it's paddles because they're a fraternity. And so they paddle people into the fraternity. The reason it's important people understand this is that Dallin Oaks and David Bednar are both Gold Brickers. Okay. And that's going to be important later in the presentation. So to establish that it is a fraternity, you just have to put in Gold Brickers Fraternity in Google, and it says there's a bunch of news articles. Former BYU fraternity celebrates 100th anniversary. Student off-campus fraternity struggles to preserve heritage. And then, down here it has the Facebook page for the fraternity talking about leaving their mark. Okay, so there were fraternities at Brigham University as well as sororities. This says President Wilkinson's ending of fraternities and sororities still stands today, but there are still some of these groups which continue to operate without recognition from BYU. Christy Curtis, 21, a BYU graduate from New Canaan, Connecticut, joined Phi Delta Gamma, which included girls from UVSC and BYU, in 1997. Curtis found out about the sorority through some of her friends, and she decided to join because she thought it would be a good way to meet people. But Curtis said the month-long induction requirements were demanding and humiliating. The leaders of the sorority were called mistresses, and they would call the girls who were pledging at any time of the night or day, she said. We had to be available all the time. I had to go wherever they told me to in 15 minutes and let them take me around the Provo and embarrass me. They called it bonding, Curtis said. The mistresses wouldn't let the girls who were trying to pledge look at them during the initiation, Curtis said. So just like Melchizedek priesthood holders shouldn't be affiliating with groups that call them goats and make them go through the types of things that we're talking about, I would propose that Relief Society sisters shouldn't be parts of groups that call them mistresses, because as we all know, a mistress is a woman who's cheating with a man who's already married, okay? So these are the types of things that I think where the members of the church weren't following that counsel from the 1886 letter. So let's look really carefully and very nice and slow at the problems that I think come from joining and affiliating what I consider a quasi-religious secret society. And the reason I call it quasi-religious is, as we're going to see, these organizations have their own prayers. They teach scripture, but it's the philosophies of men mingled with scripture. They have their own rituals. They have their own sacraments. They have their own patron saints. And so they really are quasi-religious secret societies. And so it really sets up a situation where when you join one of these, you have divided loyalties and you become a double-minded man. And I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like. So the first thing to point out is that it is a secret society, not an honor society. This is from Sigma Chi's ritual. Anybody can go and Google WikiLeaks Sigma Chi ritual, and you can pull up the entire document. And these are snippets from that document. It says, the ritual is part of the law of the fraternity. The ritual has equal force and validity in all respects with the constitution of the fraternity. The matter contained in the Constitution, however, is not secret in character, while that contained in the ritual is inviolably secret, except the special services as therein specified. The further laws of the fraternity applying to the ritual and ritualistic statutes, including their force and validity, their safekeeping, their secrecy, and the methods of their amendment, are in the governing laws of the fraternity. So these guys love to tell you, oh no, it's just an honor society. It's just an honor society. But in their own ritual, it says that it's a secret society. So you have to make sure that you don't let them pretend that it's not what it is. Okay. Inside that ritual, you're going to see the philosophies of men mingled with scripture. So here's the philosophies of men. It says, within that hour, this is the initiation. Within that hour, there is to be inculcated in the minds of the initiates a rule of life that has its foundation in the philosophies of time, philosophies that have lived through the ages because they tell the fundamentals of true brotherhood, out of which the founders of our fraternity chose the ideals to which we aspire. Okay, so they're teaching you the philosophies of men, and then they're mingling them with scripture. Here
I
is
mean, what
the
else I hear there is what you see with Masons and a lot of these secret societies is that their organizations give you access to secret knowledge. This goes back to Solomon and a lot of these, all that's one thing all these secret societies have in common is if you're true, if you're faithful, if you are loyal, and we will give you access to this secret knowledge, and that's been very dangerous. You see it across so many of these cults.
Yeah, so like let's look at a specific example because you are 100% right. But what most people do is they say that, but they don't know where to point. So I'm going to show you exactly where to point. If you go and you find the ritual for Sigma Chi and you look at the Black Supper, which is their sacrament, okay, here's how this goes. This is the script for the Black Supper. The consul, who's the leader of the fraternity, says, "My friends, be seated. Remove your blindfolds and place them on the table before you." And he says, "Eat," and they partake of the bread. He says, "Drink," and they drink of the water. He says, "My friends, we meet with quiet solemnity to honor one of our founders, Franklin Howard Scobie, who said a man is responsible to God, to his friends, and to his own best judgment for the way he makes up his mind." And here's where it gets really problematic. The consul then says, "Jesus was the founder and leader of a brotherhood. He chose different types of men from the common walks of life and pledged them to a lifelong devotion to his cause. He met them in secret places. Together, they shared certain spiritual truths and practiced noble virtues. In solemn secrecy, Jesus revealed the deepest purposes of his heart. He outlined a philosophy for a good life and announced the ideals for a better society. Secret signs, symbols, and solemn ritual characterized their brotherhood. Okay, now here's the problem. We have been given scriptures, we call them our standard works. And what Sigma Chi is teaching these young men is that Jesus formed a brotherhood and that there was secret knowledge and secret signs and secret handshakes. And the Sigma Chi is continuing this tradition with their secret brotherhood. But what do the standard works teach us about Jesus and secrets? In John 18:20, in the King James Version, which up until recently was the only version of the Bible that Latter-day Saints were allowed to use, it says, "Jesus answered him, I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither the Jews always resort. And in secret have I said nothing." So, if you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and you hold the Melchizedek priesthood and you choose to pledge with Sigma Chi, you're now in a position where you have to choose between what Sigma Chi is teaching you, which is that there are secret brotherhoods that teach you secret signs, symbols, that there's secret knowledge, that there's a separate sacrament, that there are separate prayers, or you have to believe your scriptures. And we're going to see this over and over again, that the fraternity is teaching these philosophies of men mingled with scripture to justify their existence. And I just don't think that a Melchizedek priesthood holder you can't walk in two directions. And when you join one of these, you're forced to choose one direction or another. And I'm going to show historically why I think that they chose the path of Sigma Chi more than they chose the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay? So we talked about their sacrament. They also have prayers. Here's a prayer that they say, "Oh
Wasn't there
God."
more to that sacrament too? Then just where they dress up in black robes, and wasn't there a little bit more blasphemy type things in there too?
Yeah, I don't know if it's like blasphemous or not. Down here in just a second, I'm going to show you sort of the way they set it up, and I'm going to talk about sort of the environment that they set it up in, or I can just do it. Let's just do it right now, and then I'll go
No, no, no.
backwards.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You have a presentation. Go
Okay.
ahead with where you are
Um,
going.
yeah, no problem. So in the prayer, it says, "O God, who has taught us that true friendship is true service, enable us, we pray thee, so to befriend our brothers, that we may assist them to attain those virtues which are pleasing to thee." And all the brothers together say, Amen. And then the proconsul says, "O Lord, our judge, who has commanded us to speak righteousness and to judge uprightly, grant that iniquity may not be found in our mouths, nor wickedness in our minds, but that from pure hearts we may speak and do those things that are just in thy sight." And the brothers all together say, Amen. And the proconsul says, "O God our Father, grant that we find in thee the light of knowledge and the fullness of all virtue, and grant that while we seek for the gifts of learning, we may never depart from thee, the fountain of all wisdom." And the brothers all say, Amen. And you kind of look at that and you're like, wow, that's actually kind of nice. Like there's nothing in that prayer that's necessarily offensive. But then you find that there's other prayers, and they say this: "Almighty God, our heavenly Father, with whom do live the spirits of just men made perfect, we do thank thee for all those who, having been found worthy, have eternal life with thee. We thank thee for thy Son, Jesus Christ, and that in his life and teachings, who was the great cross bearer, that we may learn worthily to wear the cross. Grant, we beseech thee, that the words we have heard this day may, through thy grace, be so grafted in our hearts that they may bring forth in us the fruit of the good living, for the exaltation of our brotherhood, and to the honor and glory of thy name. Amen." And then everybody together says, "So mote it be." Now, I didn't realize this until I gave this presentation once, and somebody reached out in the comments and said, "That is so weird that they say, 'So mote it be.'" And I said, "Well, why?" And they said, "Well, that's what Freemasons and Wiccans and neo-pagans say after they're done casting a spell, is 'so mote it be.'"
Did you know that?
So,
We watched an Outlander.
so now you have a situation where Melchizedek priesthood holders are talking about wearing the cross, which we know in the church has been a matter of dispute for 100 years now, maybe not, maybe 75 years. You know, the issue of the cross has been, the leadership of the church has said, well, no, that's not it. But then very recently, like they've sort of softened on this, and people are starting to wear the cross. But during this time when these men are joining, this is antagonistic to what the church is teaching, okay? And then again, I just want to point out that in the standard works, here's what Jesus taught about praying. It says, Jesus teaches his followers to pray with humility, authenticity, and persistence rather than for public show. He provided a model prayer, the Lord's Prayer, which centers on praising God, asking for daily provision, seeking and granting forgiveness, and requesting protection from temptation. And then one of the key principles of prayer is authenticity. Avoid loud, public displays or repeating empty phrases. Jesus instructed his followers to pray in private to a heavenly Father who sees and rewards sincerity. So it appears to me that Sigma Chi is deviating from the standard that I've been given as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ regarding prayer. Okay?
Yeah, I don't know. I am just playing devil's advocate.
Sure.
I mean, I know these organizations are bad, right? That's so I'm not like trying to like justify them, but I don't know. I just going through those prayers, I have a hard time seeing the prayers as much of a problem.
Sure. I
Or
think the
not
biggest
wearing a
issue,
cross, wearing a cross. I mean, I know that there's a lot more nefarious stuff than that, but I don't know.
yeah. And so, like, I think it's a great point. And I would say that you're like 90% of the people that I talk to, Jason. And so I think what we need to talk about is like when it's not just the prayers, it's when you amalgamate everything into one thing and you see how far they're deviating overall. That's when you have to ask yourself the question. And everybody has to ask the question for themselves: is it a big deal or is it not a big deal? I'm going to show you why I think it is a big deal later in the presentation. But certainly everybody can listen to this and be like, yeah, Justin's crazy. Like, who cares? Who cares if they're praying "So mote it be" and taking the Black Supper and have a patron saint and all these kinds of things? And people can go on with their lives if they want to. There's no problem with that. And there are going to be a lot of people who do that. right? Um, I personally think it's really problematic, and I'm going to show you why as we continue to go through the presentation.
Okay.
So let's go back to the Black Supper. Okay. Here's the proper arrangements for the Black Supper. And it says here the Black Supper in the fraternity is a serious and solemn ceremony used as a preliminary introduction to the formal initiation. The primary purpose of this ceremony is to impress candidates with the seriousness of our teachings. It is a lesson in personal responsibility. The ceremony sets the scene for the quest and gives the candidate the encouragement of the chapter for the symbolic mission he will undertake. And here's what you need to do a Black Supper. You need tables, a chair for each candidate, 2 or 3 candles for a table, goblets and saucers, a black cloth, bread and water, and black robes for members. To prepare, the ceremony should be conducted in a room large enough to accommodate the entire chapter standing at one end as a group and the candidates seated at a long table at the other end. The members are to be dressed in black robes with hoods drawn over their heads. They should stand as a body facing the candidates with arms folded, maintaining absolute silence throughout the ceremony. This is the first time the candidates should see the members in ritualistic robes. And I just want to compare this to like partaking of the Lord's Supper as a member of the church, where there's a white cloth and it's all done out in the open and nobody has robes and the prayers are set for you and that kind of a thing. So you have to imagine to yourself that the men joining this, like on a Wednesday night, are going to partake of the Black Supper. And then on a Sunday morning, they're going to partake of the Lord's Supper at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay. It says conducting the ceremony in a place other than the chapter house is permissible, provided that secrecy is maintained and that the place chosen is large enough to accommodate the entire class of initiates seated at one time, as well as the members of the active chapter standing. The consul, clad also in a black robe with his head bared, will stand alone approximately 3 paces in front of the chapter and deliver the Black Supper address from memory. The table is covered with a black cloth, and for further effect, the walls of the room may be also draped in black cloth. 2 or 3 candles placed on the table provide the only light in the room. Before each candidate is a small glass or goblet of water and a small piece of bread cut in the shape of a square. So you can see this is just sort of a perverted sacrament. Okay.
No, do you know what I actually see in response to the question or the comment about the prayers?
Mhm.
Is I see grooming going on,
Sure.
especially understanding the ritual world. This is a grooming process to, again, just like with Masons in the low levels, it is very good, very benign. It's just very, we're doing good things. But each level grooms you a little bit more until the highest levels, these men are doing the most horrific things. The ones 33-degree Masons. And I see
Yeah.
the same thing here is they're showing us the entry level things. But what is this grooming them for? They're getting used to doing things in rituals in hoods, used to doing
Yeah.
things in dark, used to doing things right now with water. But those who progress are then given higher knowledge, higher secret knowledge. And in the end, it's who these people are really worshiping is Satan. But it starts by taking them thinking they're worshiping God and then slowly grooms them until they, by the end, if they go through all the levels, they are overtly on the other side. That's what
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, so what we're going to talk about towards the end of the presentation, Jason, is this question of are these men corrupt or are they simply compromised? And I would say at this level, it's not that a member, anybody that joins a fraternity is a corrupt individual. I would never say that. But I think that what they do is they start getting you to compromise. When you look at what the first presidency was asking the church to do, and then you look at what these men were doing, what you see is that they were willing to compromise themselves in order to gain access to power, influence, and gain, right? And like you said, it starts at a very low level. It starts with dressing in black robes. It starts saying prayers that maybe you ought not to be saying. It starts like saying things like "so mote it be." It starts by being in dark rooms with black curtains and a black tablecloth, partaking of a sacrament. When you know that the proper way to take the sacrament is on a table with a white cloth and priesthood holders blessing that sacrament. And so it's not that they're corrupt at this point. It's just that they show that they're willing to compromise. And then they start ratcheting that up as you go from Sigma Chi to Skull and Bones to the Council on Foreign Relations to so on, to so on, to so on. They're just going to see how far you're willing to compromise from the standards that you were given as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think you're dead on. And I think this is why so many people fight back when we start talking about this, because truly there are so many members of fraternities who they compromise themselves, but then they stop and they say, you know what, this isn't the direction I want to go. And they repent, they move on with their lives. But then there are other ones who say, no, I like this. I like the power that I'm gaining. I like the influence that I have as a member of this. I like the gain that I'm receiving from this. And so they continue to allow themselves to be compromised further and further. And where it really gets sticky in this conversation with members of the church is that I think that what you see is that the members of the church leadership who are members of these fraternities have been willing to compromise themselves to an exceptional level, which I'm going to go through here in the historical record in the very next section of this presentation. Okay. Let's talk about another problem. Sigma Chi and all other fraternities are what are called a patronage network. So a patron, as everybody knows, that we have, patron right now where you can sign up and you're going to give money to somebody who says something that you like. And this is the same thing. Back in the days of Constantine, which is the patron, the ancient patron of Sigma Chi, they're saying that this is the person that's their patron. Now, the problem with that is that in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we don't believe in patronage. Okay, we believe that all men are created equal. We believe that God is not a respecter of persons. But in this situation, they start setting up a structure where you compromise and you enter into a patronage network where when it's time to give of your money or your time or your influence, you're first going to look to those who are inside of your network and you're going to help them first. Okay, so it's a perversion of the gospel of Jesus Christ in terms of patronage. So here's what this says. Consul, who is our ancient patron? Brothers, Constantine, who conquered by the cross. The consul gives the sign of salutation and says, brothers, guard well the honor of the cross. And then they all say their motto, in hoc signo vinces. The consul says, brothers, we part in unity. And there it is again. So mote it be. Okay. So very Masonic, very pagan, very Wiccan, that kind of a thing. Now, what does this look like in practice? It just so happens that we have a member of Sigma Chi from the University of Utah by the name of Chet Cannon, who wrote an article and told us what this is about. He wrote an article called LDS Fraternities, the Sheep in Wolf's Clothing. He says, LDS fraternities are not what they claim to be. 2.5 years ago, I entered the missionary training center looking for fun and adventure. The last thing I hoped to find there was an imposter. Before entering the MTC, I had pledged Sigma Chi at the University of Utah. After a tedious pledgeship, I earned the right and privilege to be numbered among the Sigma Chi brothers. I even got a t-shirt to prove it. This t-shirt was and is very special to me, so there was no surprise that I took it to the MTC or when it became my MTC gym shirt of choice. I needed to represent. One day, after a long series of intense scripture and language studies, a select number of us were released for our gym time. Gym time is a special time for missionaries. As I was saying, we were off to gym time, and when I entered the gym, I noticed a group of boys who didn't want me to join in any of their reindeer games. Naturally, a distraught look made its way across my face, but what to my wondering eyes should appear but a short, balding character beckoning my presence. My heart pounded, my eyes glistened, and I let out a sigh as that character said, I too am a Sigma Chi. Could it be a true brother before me? Then I heard those dreadful words. Yes, I'm a Sigma Chi with LDS SA. Brothers and sisters, LDS SA fraternities and sororities are not the same as Greek Rho fraternal organizations. I still lose sleep thinking of the audacity that boy had to number himself among the few and the proud. It is rumored that you so-called Sigma Gamma Chi members don't even have to buy your friends like the rest of us. You know, on Greek Rho, I have been fortunate enough to buy several good friends at a mere $200 to $300 a head. I know what you're thinking. They practically sell themselves. Okay. So a couple things about this. The LDS Church flirted with with creating their own fraternities through what's called LDS SA. And Elder Razband joined one of these fraternities. But the Greek fraternities really don't believe at all in any way, shape, or form that these LDS fraternities are anything like them. And that's what this guy is saying. And one of the things he's saying is, look, you guys don't have the same kind of things we do. Like when he says, I bought my friends, he means it quite literally. Okay. He means it in the sense of he pays chapter dues and he pays national dues and he pays to have access to this network that he's a part of. Okay. And so this is what patronage looks like in practice. And then this goes throughout your life to the point where I've pointed out many, many times. If you look into who gets the contracts for building temples inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, when Sigma Chi men are leading the church, it's Sigma Chi construction companies that get the contracts for building temples because they're part of the patronage network. Okay, so again,
Wow.
you start with a small compromise,
And
you
you
end
can
up
verify that? That's verified?
absolutely anybody can just go look up Oakland Construction, OKLAND, and there's like 4 or 5 of these companies. Okay, but they have it on their website, the temples that they've built. Okay, all right, couple more graven images in the ritual. It talks about lift your eyes heavenward and look. When disaster was imminent, in my despair, I was inspired to forsake the gods of stone. I besought the God of the Christians for mercy. In answer to my prayer, the white cross appeared unto me in the heavens, and an angel said, Thou shalt make a representation of the sign thou hast seen. Of gold and precious stones shalt thou make it. It shall be thine emblem, and the emblem of thy followers henceforth and forevermore. Amen. And then all brothers say amen. So do members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who joined Sigma Chi believe that an angel appeared to Constantine and told him to create a graven image of a cross built out of gold and precious stones? Because the standard about graven images in the standard works is, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. And so again, you can just sort of see where you're having to choose. And you could say that they don't believe any of this stuff, but they just want to be a part of the network. But the fact of the matter is they're being asked to incorporate this as part of their belief system. That Constantine, the man who was responsible in large part for what we used to call the Great Apostasy, actually had an angel appear to him and told him to make this graven image made out of precious stones and gold. Okay. So again, little thing, prayer, little thing, your own sacrament, little thing. Then you get to the signs and tokens. And in an ex-Mormon forum, a sorority sister says this. There was a conversation about being a member of a sorority as a member of the church. She says, the temple handshake is nearly identical to the handshake for my sorority. Which just goes to the point of what we've many people have said, which is that fraternities are based on masonry, so is the temple, and so you would expect to see this. But in the end, if you join a fraternity or sorority, those quote unquote secret signs and symbols are really just Masonic and also very much like the temple tokens that you're receiving.
What's your thoughts on the photo with President Monson giving a Masonic handshake to George Bush? I always
Yeah, I've
found that
seen that.
very interesting and never felt right to me.
Yeah, there's many of those. I mean, I think I'll tell you what I've heard from people who don't believe that it's a Masonic handshake. They say that people who shake hands a lot will shake hands that way because it helps their hand not get as tired. So when you're somebody who shakes a lot of hands, they say that that's how you shake hands. I don't personally believe that.
I mean,
I
if you've been
think
through the temple, I think that's very clear that that's what's going on. It's not, oh, I made a mistake.
Yeah, I think there are cases where you can say like, oh, maybe that's not what they were doing. But I think in that specific case that you're talking about,
Yeah,
that
it's
photo
very
seems pretty
overt.
clear to me that they're doing it very overtly. That's right. That's the way I would say it. And so I think that a lot of these guys understand these because it's in the fraternities, it's in the Masonic lodges, it's in the Mormon temple, it's in other societies, it's in other clubs, and they all know to use these to identify each other, so that they know that they're part of that network, right?
And here's the question: what is that saying when Monson comes up to the president, George Bush, and gives him that secret handshake? What is being said? What's the underlying message there?
Yeah, I think the underlying message is we are brothers, right? And we have a common purpose. And that the problem for me is that the priesthood is supposed to be that brotherhood with the common purpose. And what we have is priesthood leaders who have become brothers with those who don't share our values, which I'm going to show very clearly here in a few minutes. Okay.
I think that seems pretty benign. That answer. I think there's something. It seems much more nefarious to me.
Deeper. Yeah, than that. Yeah, it could be. It could be. All right.
And Just to let
Um,
people know just how ancient all of this is, I fell into a bit of a Constantine rabbit hole while you were talking there when we started talking about this in hoc signo vinces battle cry that they basically had when he saw this uh, rendering, like, image of the cross. It wound up then being used on all the military insignia, so coins, flags, all sorts of symbols, and this actually has ties to the Knights of Templar that actually came much later on, because Constantine, we're talking about the 4th century AD. Knights of Templar, that's around the year, what, 1000 and change? So, these ancient rituals, these ancient symbols and signs and artifacts that are continually used throughout time.
Yeah, I just think it's very clear that these secret organizations have a lot more influence on our lives than we think. These
that's
organizations
exactly
have
right.
gone on since the dawn of time. We know who their author is, and they have much more bigger impact on our lives than we realize. And they're not good. These people are not. I mean, again, when you look at these patterns, the grooming, and you wonder why we have the problems with ritual abuse and Epstein. In Bush involved with this stuff, and yeah, Monson has been named by many survivors as being involved with this ritual abuse. And again, and when you have these secret brotherhoods of hiding things, and we're not going to prosecute you, and it enables people to do vile things.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right.
But probably the most disturbing endocrine disruptor, and this is something we should all be looking at, is
Yeah.
atrazine.
What is atrazine
It's
used
in
for?
the water. It's a pesticide. They took atrazine and they put it in a tank with 40 frogs. They put it below the exposure levels that EPA considers acceptable to humans. They were all male frogs. 30 of those frogs were chemically castrated. 4 of them turned into females and produced fertile eggs.
Toxic herbicide found in many Texans' drinking water. That's from 2018, November 20th.
And we're subjecting our children to exposure to that every day. What does this do to sexual development in children? Nobody knows, because we know what it does to frogs.
You guys have seen our shirts we put out there, trust God, not government. I don't think there's been a time in history where the people could trust the government. Benjamin Franklin tells us that there's been an eternal form of warfare between the rulers and the ruled. That is why our founding fathers created a constitution, because they knew you could not trust people in power. It's naive to think that we can just sit back and naively trust that our government is taking care of us, that they are going to take care of your health, especially when you understand the pharmaceutical industry and how they profit and benefit off us being sick. How many people do you know that can no longer get pregnant? There is something going on. I have people very close that I love that cannot have children. The first place I look is at water, and that's why I appreciate people who are talking about this. That's why I am talking about this, and I'm going to keep talking about it because this is something I believe in. I talk about things I can believe in and that I do believe in. I'm passionate about what I care about. I believe that we need good water. I believe this water is poisoning our children and poisoning us. Please make sure you have a system, whether it's a whole home system, whether it's just something under the sink or something for emergencies. Go to our website, wearethepeople.org, and check out Century. It is not just a purification system that bleaches with salts everything out of the water, because guess what? You need minerals. You need the high alkaline water. You need the oxygen, and it is oxygenated water. It is healthy water. So please, I do plead to you, make sure you are not having this water pumping through your house. We appreciate you guys. We appreciate all your support, and just have the greatest respect for all of you. Thank you.
And so I think one of the worst things about it for me is that what's called a death oath. Okay. So the death oath in Sigma Chi looks like this. It says, this requires more of you than the world requires of other men. Is it still your desire to become a member of this fraternity, knowing that your obligations are of lifelong duration? And the candidate must make an affirmative answer. Now, they're very serious about this. If you go today and you go to the Sigma Chi terms and conditions page, number 10 on the Sigma Chi terms and conditions says, membership in Sigma Chi is lifelong in duration. You can be expelled for good cause, but you cannot resign or disaffiliate. Okay, you cannot resign or disaffiliate. So in other words, you can't repent. If you decide that you've made a bad choice, Sigma Chi will not allow you to repent. If you think, oh gosh, I shouldn't partake of the Black Supper, or oh my gosh, like I shouldn't be saying so mote it be because it's unbecoming of a Melchizedek priesthood holder, or I shouldn't be a part of a patronage network, you are stuck. You cannot resign or disaffiliate. Once you accept the invitation to membership and proceed through the fraternity's ritualistic initiation, you cannot resign for any reason or circumstance. So you become the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you realize that maybe you didn't set the best example for other priesthood holders. Tough luck. You can't resign, okay, for any reason or circumstance. And they're really, really serious about this. It's truly a death oath, okay? And it's not a death oath in the sense that they're pricking each other's fingers or slitting each other's wrists and mingling blood and that kind of a thing, but they take this death oath very, very seriously, and it puts you in a position as a member of the church where you can't extract yourself from a situation where you probably shouldn't have been a part of it to begin with. The only thing you can do is ignore and pretend like you're not a part of it anymore.
Until they come calling your number.
Potentially, and that was a big problem with me is it related to my excommunication. Okay, my stake president was a member of Sigma Chi. President Ballard was a member of Sigma Chi. President Ballard knew I was looking into Gordon Bowen. President Nelson was a member of Sigma Chi. And I was pretty concerned about like, hey, what does it mean that these men have these oaths outside the oath and covenant of the priesthood that we all share? And what's required of my stake president if President Ballard comes and says, hey, this guy is researching this guy, Gordon Bowen, and it could really hurt the church. You need to excommunicate him for apostasy. And I don't think that's what happened necessarily, but it was certainly something that caused me great concern as we went through the process, because like, unfortunately, when somebody joins a society like this, what it does is it creates a breach of trust. Okay. It creates a situation where if you're willing to keep this secret, what other secrets are you willing to keep? And what else aren't you telling me? And it really gets in the way of forming what I would consider a Zion society where you're of one heart and one mind, because I'm not of one heart and one mind with men who partake of the Black Supper. I'm not of one heart and one mind with men who say, so mote it be at the end of their prayers. I'm not of one heart and one mind with people who think that I should prioritize people in my patronage network over the other people around me. Okay. So that's, to me, again, like it's kind of subtle, but like, as you get deeper and deeper into it, you just see that it becomes impossible to establish Zion, which is the purpose that God set up the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in these last days. And when you have these men, it creates a situation where there becomes a wedge where you can no longer do that, because in order to be on their side and quote unquote sustain them, you have to sustain these things that they've done because they can't get out of it. They're stuck. They made a death oath. Okay. So here's a Sigma Chi tradition. Okay. We know about the tradition of our fathers. Here's a Sigma Chi tradition. The Sigma Chi sweetheart gets kissed by every member of Sigma Chi. And in this particular picture, in the background here where my cursor is, that's Russell M. Nelson, the significant Sig in this year where Beverly Felt was getting kissed by every Sigma Chi. He's standing back here grinning from ear to ear. He's clearly enjoying the tradition. Okay. Now let's talk about the standard regarding false traditions in our standard works.
Again, I see grooming, and I see what happens in rituals on the far end of things. And to me, this is just precursors to that.
Right. And I know it's 2026 and everybody's like, holy cow, like women have body counts in the thousands and you want to talk to me about a girl getting kissed by 15 people?
That's not what this is about. This is about these men thinking that that this woman is an object and they all get to take their turn on her. Again, we see this all the time at the extreme, and it's just the grooming to that.
That's exactly right. I would agree 100%. Okay. And so it's not the thing that's being done. It's the compromise that you make when you do that thing that opens up the door for what Doctrine and Covenants 93:39 talks about. It says, and that wicked one cometh and take away light and truth through disobedience. And I think the thing we need to ask ourselves is, when a Sigma Chi member lines up to take advantage of a young woman where everybody's kissing her, is that being disobedient to the principles of the gospel? And I think every member of the church who comes in good faith to the conversation will acknowledge that that is being disobedient. And so if we believe our standard works, then the consequence of that disobedience is that light and truth is taken away from the children of men because of the traditions of their fathers. Okay.
I mean,
And then
you
Ezra
think about
Taft
the
Benson.
twins. You think
Mhm.
about the twins and what they talked about, how they were property to these men. And again, they were vessels, and the men could come and that was their right to come and access these vessels. I mean, I
That's
see
true.
that's what I see there with this is you're training these men that they have the right to access these women. They're and it's again when you once you see the far end of the grooming, it's easy to see how this is justifying and preparing and grooming these men to think that this stuff is normal behavior.
Yeah. And I think so. What I'm trying to do today is to show you the seeds. I'm trying to show you the little things that everybody wants to wave away and pointing out that once you open that door, what our standard works teach us is that once you make that compromise and you lose your integrity, then you have opened the door to losing light and truth and doing things that are far, far worse, which we're going to see the church has done because I believe these men compromised their integrity when they joined these types of organizations. Okay. So in the end, all I'm talking about is the blind leading the blind. And I'm not the one saying that. Here's another fraternity's homepage from the Utonian with a blind fraternity member. You see the signs of the fraternity down here leading a goat that just happens to have the numbers 3, 2, and 2 horns. So skull and bones, leading them off the plank instead of leading them on the path up to the kingdom. Okay.
Wow.
And I think that's a really perfect, like they know it's not that they don't know what they're doing. I think that's another part of it that like when you talk to a member of Sigma Chi, or you talk to family members of the Sigma Chi, they're like, oh, well, they were young and they didn't know, but they did know. And they do know what they're doing. Maybe not, maybe they think that it's a small thing and maybe they don't understand the consequence of compromising at a young age, but they do know that they're compromising. I really believe that you can't go to a Sigma Chi initiation as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and not understand that you're compromising the principles and the doctrines that you've been asked to live. You just can't do that. Okay. Here is an example. This is written by a man who was a part of Sigma Chi. He titled his article, The Sick Heart of Sigma Chi. He says, for a certain kind of boy, a guy with standards he can't understand at a certain tender age, fraternity is simply a given. For this kind of boy, conformity is a godsend, and I was that kind of boy. In the long run, of course, fraternities have more or less the ethical dimension of a new hairstyle or a soft drink flavor or a dance step you learn to perfection, then forget about entirely. And I don't feel particularly sorry to have been a member since I'm suspicious of revising my past and dislike the idea that anything I did and can remember so vividly was completely worthless. But still, I would like to have chosen to join, to have back those decisions I made by not deciding. Nothing, after all, is as venerable as nervy volition exerted in early age. Like all conformists, we did not think of ourselves as conformists. We were men, individuals and individualists. We knew what we knew. We prized life's lonelier roads. We were hard guys to convince of things, stiletto-eyed, serious, even grave. The fraternity meant to solidify these things and add some others, fairness, decency, good manners. We winked, nodded, nested chins in our palms when listening, wrinkled our brows, clinched Winstons in our teeth, dealt a fair hand. We meant something, and we knew it. Yet we also knew how to let down the gates for a good time when the right times came. We knew how to treat a woman, how to confide. We were easy in the company of men. We knew where to draw the line. Imagine our surprise then at finding an entire group of guys who felt as we did about practically everything. I'm going to skip this part. I'm going to go down to the next part. Our bunch had standards, but to be initiated to Sigma Chi, Michigan State, 1963, you were still required to pick up a stuffed olive off the chapter room floor using nothing but the naked cheeks of your behind. And while many quote unquote actives watched and cheered, deliver the olive to a small, waiting Dixie cup. You still had to sit 6 hours straight on the hard edge of a hard chair, knees together, blindfolded, while someone played Ravel's Bolero Fortissimo directly into your ears. You had to do many, many, many painful push-ups. You had to let the older boys scream obscenities and insults in your face, blow cigar smoke in your eyes, and breathe on you until they were tired of it. You had to tramp out into the frozen Michigan night in search of nothing less than a white cross, the fraternity's sacred emblem, which of course wasn't there. You had to bray like a donkey, buzz like a fly, bleat like a goat, be scorned, scourged, ridiculed, and insulted until they let you join them. it must have seemed like a good idea. And this is where I think it becomes really clear that as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ who believes in true fraternity through the Melchizedek priesthood, you have a real problem when you get to this part of hazing. And hazing, I would propose, is the lowest form of ritual abuse that we know of. Okay. And I'm going to show you that truly hazing is ritual abuse. And I know that when we talk about ritual abuse, and specifically satanic ritual abuse, we don't think about these kinds of things. But like we've been talking about, Jason and Alexia, when you start with things like picking up a stuffed olive off the chapter room floor and using nothing but the naked cheeks of your behind to take it across the room and drop it, that is a form of abuse and shame bonding. And if you're willing to do that, then the next thing they're going to try is to get you to do something else. And then eventually they're going to find out if you're willing to worship Satan. And if you're willing to worship Satan, then you go from things like picking up olives with your butt over a period of time to doing things that are far more serious, I would propose. I at least think that logically, nobody can say that that's not possible. And I would say that, like, when you see that people are willing to do things like pick up an olive off the chapter room floor using nothing but the naked cheeks of their behind, you start to understand that people are willing to go to certain lengths to achieve certain things in their life. Okay.
You know, it's funny you say this because this all sounds to me like humiliation rituals. And even when I was in college and I saw frat boys, I always just thought, what a bunch of weirdos. Like, how desperate do you need to be? And there is like a part of it which is bonding, brotherhood, which is great. But once you start subjecting yourself to things like humiliation rituals in order to fit in, it goes to what you're saying. It's what will you do next? So I think all the people that choose the next level and when they ultimately choose things like the adversary over light, they're saying, I don't have enough in me, enough meaning and enough light in me that can overpower whatever meaning I'm going to get from this. So whether you're a really weird frat boy or a Satanist, I think you're all just subject to the same humiliation ritual and you're just a weirdo.
Well, and it's
Yeah.
people's love for
Yeah.
power. I don't think you can, at the bottom of all of this is people's hunger for power and to be able to control and manipulate people and humiliate people. And that's what's happening here is there's people who get off on the humiliating these young kids, having them do these things, and eventually these
Sure.
kids know if they play the game, they will be the ones in power, humiliating others and doing other things. So I mean, that's really what it is. It's a gateway to power, and showing them that they have unlimited power and connections to power. If
That's
if
right.
they
Yeah.
will if they will stay secret and stay loyal to each other.
There, you got it. And so, and like, I mean, so that's you guys are so on point right now, because these humiliation rituals are what we call shame bonding or trauma bonding. And so, is it bonding? When they say that we're bonding, is it bonding? Yes. Is it the type of bonding that the Lord wants us to participate in? Absolutely not. Okay. And then they go from things like emotionally abusing you or verbally abusing you. And we know that they do things like paddle you in. So here is an example of shame bonding, which I call the root of ritual abuse from Skull and Bones. It talks about the order having a very distinctive pin, a gold skull and crossbones holding two ruby eyes. The Senior Society's pin depicts an emerald eye, owl guarding a key. But what you get down here is the fraternity's colors are red and white. Some of the initiates of other years claim that they should be, and in fact are, black and blue. Of course, referring to the bruises that you get when you're paddled into one of these secret societies. So overall, the only thing I want people to walk away from is understanding that when you get initiated into these, you engage in humiliation rituals that shame bond you to other men with the promise that if you will do it and stay secret, like you said, Jason, that at some point you will be the one administering the pain and administering the abuse and administering the humiliation and given the opportunities for power, influence, and gain. So it's just a bad deal all the way around. It really is. And when I
Isn't that
say that it's a form, go ahead.
I was gonna say, isn't this also similar to the initiation ritual in the Illuminati, like the Black Eye Club? And I don't know if this has been verified or if it's just rumor, but all of the politicians that show up with a black eye or celebrities and what's known about that is that's part of
Yeah.
an initiation ritual into the
Yeah.
Illuminati.
So again, like if you just think about it, like the thing that's so great about having the fraternity ritual is that you begin to see very clearly the low levels, the outline, like it becomes, it's no longer cloudy and nebulous. You now see, oh, they are literally verbally abusing, emotionally abusing, spiritually abusing, and physically abusing men in order to be a part of this. And then once you can see that as a reality, it shifts the Overton window to where you can have the conversation and say, look, if they're willing to do that, can you not see that a small percentage of those men are going to be willing to do things like that are far, far worse if you promise them even more power and more influence and gain? And so it brings it to a place where you can say, like, look, the majority of fraternity men aren't going to be willing to do that. Like everybody has their limits, and the majority of fraternity men probably aren't going to allow themselves to be taken down that path to further emotional, verbal, physical, spiritual abuse. But there are going to be some. And if there are going to be some, then where do you find them? And I think it's not too hard to realize that you're going to find them amongst Satanists. You're going to find them amongst people who are thirsting after power, influence, and gain, which may be a capitalist, right? It may be somebody who really wants to be in charge of a church. But I think you can have the conversation now because you can see that in the real world, people are willing to inflict and be inflicted upon forms of ritual abuse. And hazing is a form of ritual abuse. You can look it up. It says, yes, it is entirely fair and widely accepted by psychologists, legal experts, and advocacy groups to categorize hazing as ritual abuse. Yeah, so let's talk about David Hamblin, because Kate Talley, who was on your show, gives an amazing testimony about how David Hamblin worked, okay? And what she talks about is how David Hamblin would light a candle in the middle of a dark room. Sounds familiar, right? Sounds like a Black Supper, okay? And then what he would do is he would raise his arm to the square and he would invoke what he calls the patriarchal priesthood, which is supposed to be greater than the Melchizedek priesthood. And then he would start asking people questions about their sexual life, which is just a form of emotional abuse, right? And then he would force these women to submit to their husbands, which is a form of physical abuse. And was David Hamblin a member of a fraternity? No, he wasn't. But you can see the parallels and the similarities, and that David Hamblin just takes it to a whole nother level, where instead of just paddling somebody, unfortunately, and Kate, I'll let people go watch Kate's episode, but unfortunately, what ends up happening is sexual abuse in that situation, because David Hamblin is pressuring her and emotionally manipulating her and abusing her and telling her that if she doesn't submit to these sexual acts that her husband wants her to submit to, that she's not a good wife, that she's not a good member of the church, that she's causing him to have problems, right? And so now we can start having the conversation and understanding that this is not outside the realm of what we consider polite society, because these Sigma Chi guys are guys that run companies and run churches and run corporate, like they're everywhere inside of our societies. Okay.
Very good. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about a little bit more. Like that's all the Sigma Chi stuff. Let's talk about Skull and Bones. Is this Yale Skull and Bones? Yes. In the Utonian, it says Skull and Bones was founded at Yale University, and I think it's a typo. It was actually founded in 1832. And on May 18th, 1909, 11 men of the junior class of the University of Utah became charter members of the society at this school. Okay. You're going to run into people, if you try to have this conversation, who tell you that the University of Utah Skull and Bones is not from Yale, but they tell you that they are from Yale. So please don't let them do that. Okay. It's in the yearbook. I want to just point out like how silly it is when they say that Skull and Bones is an honor society, because when they go to do interviews with the school newspaper, here's how they show up. So I jokingly call this, welcome to our honor society. Please put on your robes and death mask. Okay. I was a part of several honor societies growing up. None of them ever asked me to put on a black robe or a death mask. And if they had, I would have known that I wasn't in an honor society. I was in something completely different. Okay.
Instead of eyes wide shut.
Yeah, that's right. So to drive that home, they know that they're not an honor society, because here's the picture that they gave to the newspaper. You can see down here, it says, courtesy of the University of Utah's Skull and Bones Society. Okay, so let's stop for just 1 second. If we think that Sigma Chi, if we accept that Sigma Chi is the lowest level of ritual abuse, then what I would expect is as you filter and graduate from Sigma Chi and Pi Kappa Alpha into Skull and Bones, they're going to ratchet up and find out what else you're willing to compromise. So let's look at what kind of people are joining Skull and Bones at the University of Utah. They give the school newspaper this photo, and at first glance, you're like, oh, it's just a skull on a couple of books. But what we know is that these fraternity guys and these club members love symbolism. And if you look at the skull itself, you'll see this tooth. Okay, that's not a human tooth. Okay, if you look at the nose cavity, that's not a human nasal cavity, but it does have what? A white cross in the middle of the nasal cavity. If you look at the skull, you can see that the skull has been cut open, so the brain has been removed. And then the big thing, the big thing is that, I don't know if I can blow this up enough, but the books that they put it on are encyclopedias, and they put it on the two books that start with M-A-L and S-A-R. Okay? So if you're looking at this picture from a symbolic point of view, you have to remember that M-A-L means bad or evil. The words that start with mal are malfunction, malaria, malformed, malnutrition, malnourished, malignant, malpractice, dismal, malicious. Okay? Then the SAR part, I'm not quite sure that I've got that, but if you look at the Hebrew, I was an ancient Near Eastern studies major, so I know Hebrew. And if you look at this word sar, it means prince, ruler, or chief.
Wow.
So if you look at this picture symbolically, what you have is something not quite human that's claiming to be a prince of evil or a prince of malignancy or something along those lines. So you've gone from Sigma Chi, where you're partaking of the Black Supper and you compromise, and then you get invited to this, and now all of a sudden you're identifying as a prince of evil. So you see how
I would
you start
encourage
with this
people
small
to go dig
compromise?
into, and if I would encourage people to go and dig into Skull and Bones at Yale if you want to have an understanding, because there's a lot that's been leaked, and it is horrific. This is, I mean, it's very evil, the stuff that goes on in these groups.
Secret Society was officially founded at Yale University in 1832, but finds its roots in Freemasonry and takes its symbology from the Pirates and Brotherhood of Death. Like the Masons, Bonesmen choose their own initiates, and the only way to enter the Brotherhood is to be tapped by an existing member. Only 15 members are accepted each year, which is absolutely amazing, considering the number of important historical figures who just happen to be Skull and Bonesmen. For instance, U.S. Presidents William H. Taft, George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Walker Bush were all three members of Skull and Bones. The following U.S. Senators, Prescott Bush, John Kerry, David Boren, Jonathan Bingham, John Chafee, John Sherman Cooper, James Buckley, Chauncey Depew, Frank Bosworth Brandegie, Robert A. Taft, William Maxwell Evarts, and John Hines were all Skull and Bonesmen. Governors Averell Harriman, William Bissell, William Henry Gleason, Simeon Eben Baldwin, and David Boren were Bonesmen, and so were Congressmen Frank Bosworth Brandegie, Howard M. Baldrich, and Jonathan Brewster Bingham. Supreme Court Justices Morrison Waite, Potter Stewart, William Taft, Simeon Eben Baldwin, and Edward Baldwin Whitney were all Bones brothers. Also Pierre J., the first chairman of the New York Federal Reserve, and George L. Harrison, president of the New York Federal Reserve, were both Bonesmen. Fritz Springmeier wrote, "Investigations revealed that the main purpose of the Skull and Bones is to get as many members as possible into strategically placed positions of power." Robbins stated that President Bush has tapped 5 Bonesmen to join his administration. One of them is current Securities and Exchange Commissioner William Donaldson, class of 1953. Donaldson will answer no questions about the Bones. Right down the line, almost every Bonesman has proven unbelievably successful in his chosen profession. William Maxwell Evarts, class of 1837, became U.S. Secretary of State, Attorney General, and a Senator. Russell Davenport, class of 1923, was editor of Fortune magazine and created the Fortune 500 list. Amory Ho Bradford, class of 1934, married Carol Warburg Rothschild and was general manager for the New York Times. Richard Gow, class of 1955, was president of George Bush's Zapata Oil Company. Winston Lord, class of 1959, was chairman of the CFR, ambassador to China, and Clinton's Assistant Secretary of State. Founder of the National Review and host of TV show Firing Line, William F. Buckley was a Bonesman, and so was Henry Luce, the founder of Time Magazine, Life, Fortune, House and Home, and Sports Illustrated. Percy Rockefeller was a prominent businessman, founder and vice president of O&Oak Corporation, and sat on the board of directors for over a dozen large corporations. Alphonso Taft was a U.S. Attorney General, Secretary of War, and ambassador to Russia and Austria. His son William Taft was President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. As Ron Rosenbaum said in a CBS interview, "I think Skull and Bones has had slightly more success than the Mafia in the sense that the leaders of the 5 families are all doing 100 years in jail, and the leaders of the Skull and Bones families are doing 4 and 8 years in the White House." Many Bonesmen have graduated with CIA and intelligence community jobs waiting for them too. F. Truby Davison, Howard Weaver, William Sloane Coffin Jr., V. Van Dyne, James Buckley, Bill Buckley, Hugh Cunningham, Hugh Wilson, Reuben Holden, Charles R. Walker, Robert D. French, Archibald McLeish, Dino Pianzio, William and McGeorge Bundy, Richard Moore, and George Bush are all Bonesmen with U.S. intelligence agency jobs. As Yale professor of history Gaddis Smith said, Yale has influenced the Central Intelligence Agency more than any other university, giving the CIA the atmosphere of a class reunion.
And
Right.
just another interesting thing, some of this actually comes from Isaiah. Sar Shalom means Prince of Peace. So again, back to the inversion, Malsar, Sar Shalom, if you look at it in relation to Isaiah.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't. That's fascinating. Yeah. And so I just want people like, I'm not expecting people to necessarily swallow this whole right now because it's an entirely different way of thinking about the world. But I'm hoping that people can see that you start with small compromises and you make larger and larger compromises. And then you think, okay, if you go from Sigma Chi to Skull and Bones, and then you get invited to the Council on Foreign Relations, and you're already a Prince of Malevolence, what are you going to become after Skull and Bones, right? And what are you going to become after that and after that?
And I think an important conversation people need to, factor into this is, we know what's gone on with Epstein. The victim statements it's horrific. It is heartbreaking to read what we know has gone on with that man and the island and at the ranch. And yet we wonder why there's no justice. No one is looking into it. And this is the reason why, is because these men have sworn oaths to protect each other at all cost.
Death oaths.
Death oaths. And so, yes, you have presidents involved. You have judges. You have people involved at every level in these secret organizations, shaking their hands with the secret handshakes to protect each other and protect their power. And it's very clear that is happening there. And to me, it's very clear it's happening in our own backyard when you look at what happened with Charlie Kirk getting shot here and all the agencies covering it up in Utah. And then you look at all the abuse. Look at David Hamblin, admitted raping his daughter. No justice. This is the heart of it all.
Yep. And so the next part of this presentation is, by their fruits shall ye know them. Okay, because that's another standard that we have from our standard works, is look at the fruits, not what they say, but what they do. And I'm going to show you what's been going on inside the church since, let's go back again. 1886, you get the Brethren warning about education being taken over and children being trained away from Mormonism and all these things. And then what you see is that the church turns its back on the first presidency and they do the opposite of what they were counseled to do. And then by the 1950s, I'm going to go through, you now have a crop of guys who've gone through these secret societies, like in practice. Okay. So you have guys like Richard Worthland, M. Russell Ballard, Russell M. Nelson, and thousands of others, okay, who've gone through, and you start seeing the fruits of what happens when Melchizedek priesthood members join organizations like Sigma Chi, Pi Kappa Alpha, and then graduate onto places like Skull and Bones. So let's talk about that. A lot of these people end up in organizations like Rotary International. And we talked about this in another show. I think it was the same one you were talking about, Alexia, where there's a really important hinge moment in the history of the church, where David O. McKay is president of the church. And on one side, he has Richard L. Evans, who's a part of Rotary International. And on the other side, he's got Ezra Taft Benson, who's a part of the John Birch Society. And both of these men are progressing through that society. But David O. McKay puts his thumb down on the scales, and he says to President, or not to President, but to Ezra Taft Benson, he says, you cannot continue down this path and act like you're a member. Like, you can't do this as a member of the church. You can still quietly do it, but you're not representing the church's values. At the same time, he says, 10 years ago today, Mr. Wallace said, Elder Evans was nominated a candidate for district governor of Rotary. At that time, President McKay said the aims of Rotary are compatible with those of the church. So you can see that President McKay he takes a stand, and he says the aims of the John Birch Society are not compatible with Rotary International, but the aims of Rotary International are compatible with the church. And that's a really important discussion that people need to have, because the fact is that the aims of Rotary International are sympathetic to the aims of the United Nations, which President Benson called a satanic organization. So this isn't a small thing. It's just something that people don't know or understand.
This is very important. I really encourage you guys, our audience, if you have not gone and watched The Kingdom Divided, we'll put it here in the show. So you can use the image of the thumbnail right there, because Justin goes into great detail in explaining this there. And if you go look at any of our other shows about the United Nations and its foundations and how it was founded at 666 Rockefeller, there is no question that organization is a biblical organization that is bringing in a lot of darkness that people should be absolutely fighting against, not funding and promoting and encouraging it like our church has.
Right. And so now what we know, and I think what I discovered, is where that really happened. And that's where you get fraternity members have a strong presence in Rotary International, whereas on the other side of it, it's a little bit different, okay? But you can see that in 1956, David O. McKay says, I would love for Richard to rise to the top of Rotary International. And lo and behold, what happens? 10 years later, Richard L. Evans is elected the president of Rotary International. Okay? And so here's a picture of him with Princess Grace of Monaco at the Rotary Convention in Nice, France. Okay? So once David O. McKay puts his thumbs on the scales there, the church tilts in a certain direction. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that these fraternity members are beginning to gain positions of influence inside the church. So Richard L. Evans becomes an apostle at the same time that he's president of Rotary International. Another member of Rotary International was Spencer W. Kimball. And of course, he becomes an apostle. And you get from the 1960s into the 1970s. And by the time President Kimball becomes the president of the church, he's deeply concerned about the fact that we've been proselyting for a couple hundred years, but the church is not spreading the way that he wants it to. And so what happens here is that President Kimball sets up multiple programs inside the church that are outside normal priesthood channels. And one of the people that he sets up a program with that's outside of priesthood channels is a man by the name of David M. Kennedy. David M. Kennedy was the chairman of the Continental Illinois Bank, which was the first too big to fail bank in the United States. People think that we got too big to fail from 2008. We didn't. We got too big to fail from Continental Illinois when it almost failed. And David M. Kennedy was the chairman of Continental Illinois Bank and was the one who sort of set them on the path to becoming too big to fail. But instead of giving him a calling and putting him inside of priesthood channels, what happens here is that President Kimball does this. Until the closing decades of the 20th century, Mormon or LDS was a term that meant little or nothing in a vast international arena. Political, religious, and social circumstances inimical to missionary work abetted this situation. However, beginning in 1974, the church mounted 3 unique initiatives to expand the outer edges of its stakes and missions. 1, the appointment of David Kennedy as the church's ambassador at large. Okay, not a priesthood calling, just the church's ambassador at large, a secular calling inside the church office building. 2, an expanded scope for the international mission. And 3, the founding of an international affairs office in Washington, D.C. This was led by a woman by the name of Beverly Campbell that we're going to talk about. These 3 unpublicized initiatives, so not done by the law of common consent, okay? These 3 unpublicized initiatives functioned outside normal priesthood channels, quietly renegotiating, so secretly is another way of saying that, secretly renegotiating the outer boundaries of the church's international presence. Operating behind the scenes, they made first contact with government leaders whose permission would allow the church to send in missionaries or otherwise establish its presence and propound its message. And who do you think these government leaders were? They were fraternity members. They were Rotary International members. They were members of the United Nations. And David Kennedy knew them because not only was he the former chairman of Continental Illinois, he was also the Treasury Secretary to President Nixon, amongst a host of things that he did. So tremendous. Well, and the biggest person that he had access to was a man by the name of Sindona, okay, who was a criminal. Sindona was a criminal who was part of Opus Dei, which is a Catholic secret society. And Sindona got caught doing all kinds of illegal things with money and setting up banks. And the only reason, not the only reason, David Kennedy got wrapped up in that, and he got sued by the Italian government, but he got off. And it could be because he was part of these secret societies and these secret networks and these organizations, potentially. Okay.
So what are the ties to the Bohemian Grove?
Yeah, so sorry about that. I put it in there and that I didn't tell you. In 1970, David Kennedy went to Bohemian Grove as a guest of the president of Bank of America. So a lot of people in the church know about the Bohemian Club and how Wilford Woodruff spoke at the Bohemian Club and then died there. What they don't know is that David M. Kennedy literally went to the Bohemian Grove. Okay. And that's where they burn effigies. And then again, like you talk about Skull and Bones, there's lots of rumors about what they do there, and none of it's good. And certainly none of it is anything that any Melchizedek priesthood holder should be taking part of. What we know for sure is that Bohemian Grove is a place where the most powerful people in the world come together to talk about what they want to accomplish in the world. And David M. Kennedy was one of those people.
Wow.
Let's get into Bohemian Grove. Let's get into the technocracy. Let's get into who runs things. It's Bohemian Grove's what they call it that. They've got this ritual. So I'm sitting there during the ritual, and I'm like, hey, this is pretty cool. And the dude goes, shut up, I'll kill you. And they're all taking it very seriously. And they were taking it very serious. This hearse comes in with the body of a child. It is an effigy. They're not killing it.
And well, it's just a bundle of sticks, right?
Yeah, well, it looks like a kid. No, later, others infiltrated later that worked there and got us photos of it. It's an image of a kid.
Look at that. Look at that owl god, and look at the fire underneath the owl god.
And there's Ronald Reagan, and I knew that he was part of the actual ritual at Bohemian Grove.
But that's from the Bible, is you would sacrifice a child to Moloch.
Give not your children to the fires of Moloch.
Right. Listen, you could ignore that if it was like a bunch of poor people in the woods doing that. These guys
even then I'd be worried.
Even then it would be weird. These guys are the top of like every industry in America. It's at least curious.
Okay. So what's really startling to me about this is that President Kimball gives a talk at a regional representatives conference a couple days before General Conference in 1974. Before every General Conference, all the leaders of the church come to Salt Lake and they do training for the regional representatives. And so on April 4th, 1974, Spencer Kimball says this: my brethren, why did the Lord continue to repeat and repeat these phrases if he did not have meaning for them? To President Thomas B. Marsh and to you, the 12, the Lord said, I have chosen you to hold the keys of my kingdom abroad among all nations, that thou mayest be my servant to unlock the door of the kingdom in all places. Then he says, I introduced you to Brother David Kennedy. I have a vision that probably Brother Kennedy and others may assist the 12 in finding the keys that have apparently been lost to many nations, wherein we can open those worlds. So this is a little bit tricky, but like my understanding of priesthood keys is not that they come from guys who find them, who've been at Bohemian Grove and have been parts of organizations like Sigma Chi and partaken of the Black Supper. Like my understanding of priesthood keys, which I will acknowledge is probably not what it needs to be, is that they come directly from God to those that God has given authority to. But President Kimball seemed to believe that he could not receive those keys from God himself, and he needed people like Brother Kennedy to help them find those keys and open doors to the nations. And then the way that they open those doors is through patronage networks and so on and so forth. And what you end up seeing is that that's in April of 1974. By October of 1974, You have Nelson Rockefeller at Brigham Young University with, down here, having lunch with Kimball, so Rotary International Kimball, Goldbricker, BYU President Dallin Oaks, and other Mormon leaders and Utah politicians. Rockefeller emerged from the luncheon wearing a Garn for Senate. Garn is Jake Garn, who is a member of, guess what fraternity? Sigma Chi.
Wow.
Okay, up here you see that he's with Utah's 2 senators, Wallace F. Bennett and Democrat Frank Moss. The Bennetts are Sigma Chi and Pi Kappa Alpha. Okay, so you can start to see that what's happened here is that these guys are now in positions of power, influence, and gain, and they're starting to set policy for the church, which includes Rockefeller Petroleum in the Middle East. Oh, I need to read this. It says, Nelson Rockefeller, whose grandfather built a $1 billion family fortune on petroleum, says today's Arab oil barons are becoming the world's new capitalists. So that's the message he came to deliver, and that he was giving to church leaders, senators, all that kind of thing. And then by June of 1977, you see President Kimball leaving temple meetings to meet with the Khashoggi family. Now, for those who don't know, the Khashoggis, Adnan Khashoggi was an arms dealer who was involved with Jeffrey Epstein. Okay? And I can't draw a line straight from Jeffrey Epstein and Adnan Khashoggi to the church quite yet, and it may not even exist. But what we know is that the Khashoggis are in a triangle at the top, where they're the top, and on one side they have Epstein, on the other side they have Spencer Kimball. And this is from his journal. We found this when they released his journal, and when we found it, they removed it from his journal. So I don't think you can find it online anymore, except if you look at my presentations. But here's what it says. Wednesday, June 8th, 1977. Held a meeting of the First Presidency at 8 o'clock this morning. At 9:45 a.m., I excused myself from the meeting and met with Dr. Mohammed Khashoggi, who is like the doctor for the royal family, and members of his family who are here for the dedication of the new International Center, also known as the Triad Center, that is being erected out west of the Salt Lake City airport. These gentlemen contributed $11 million 2 years ago towards the construction of this center. Okay, so the gentlemen that he's talking about are Mohammed and Adnan Khashoggi and the Khashoggi family, who are donating money earned from Iran-Contra activities because they are arms dealers and just terrible human beings. Okay, and the church, the president of the church, is excusing himself from temple meetings to meet with these guys.
You know, it's interesting. It might not be related, but when you pull into the Salt Lake City airport, you see these really ominous looking triangle pyramids that were just erected last year,
A couple years ago.
a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Don't know what it
Yeah.
means,
But
but
it'd be interesting to look in the Triad Center and see about corruption there, and that'd be interesting for some of our researchers like Chelsea to dig into. But yeah, that's fascinating. This is fascinating.
So it's not just President Kimball, though. If you remember, there was David Kennedy, and then there was Beverly Campbell that called in. And guess where Beverly Campbell was getting investment money? She says in her autobiography, we needed to proceed. Our Saudi Arabian investor, okay, so you can see this. It's a direct line. Rockefeller to Kimball to Campbell. She's getting $50,000 in the 1970s in earnest money as a partner in another plantation land, and we had put up a considerable sum of money. So all these people who are operating outside of priesthood channels are now plugged into networks like with Saudi Arabian investors and arms dealers. This also just so happens to be right around the time that Mormon political power peaks with the Reagan administration.
Yeah, and you bring up so many good points, Justin. I just, to me, does God really need his people to make deals with the devil and secret combinations to get his work done? Because that's, and you really dove into that in the show we did. When they meet, what was the show we did?
Kingdom Divided.
Kingdom Divided. You did such a good job laying it here. Now you've even connected more dots, but it just seems clear that the church leadership has it seems gone the path of making deals with works of darkness and secret combinations to accomplish God's work, and I don't think that's how God works. And especially when you start to look at all the the cover up, the abuse, the fruits of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think, go ahead, Alexia. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, what year was this in?
So we're now in the early 1980s. The Triad Center is being invested in and built in from the late 1970s through the early 1980s. And the key question becomes, are they ignorant or complicit as they make these deals with the devil? Right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to suggest to you that they were not ignorant. And here's why. If you look at what's going on at this time, the church is also involved with the Central Intelligence Agency. And so if they're dealing with Adnan Khashoggi, I cannot believe for a second that they did not know exactly who Adnan Khashoggi was and what he was involved in. And so I asked artificial intelligence to give me a little bit of a blurb about this. It says, with these deep ties acknowledged, the probability shifts significantly. If the church's network was that tightly intertwined with the federal and intelligence landscape, which it was, it forces a different interpretation of the Khashoggi relationship. 1, plausible deniability versus ignorance. Institutional intelligence is compartmentalized. While the first presidency as a formal body might not have been handed official CIA briefing binders, individuals within the church's leadership and advisor networks almost certainly understood exactly who Khashoggi was, not just as an arms dealer, but as a crucial Western asset in the Middle East. 2, calculated risk. Khashoggi was heavily protected by the US government throughout the 1970s and early 1980s because his backroom deals explicitly served US Cold War interests. For Utah and LDS leaders, partnering with a man who was essentially a shadow extension of US foreign policy wasn't seen as a risk. It was viewed as a venture backed by the highest levels of global power. And then there was a part where there could have been an unforeseen betrayal. What likely did blindside leaders wasn't that Khashoggi did backroom deals, but that he got caught in a massive scandal called Iran-Contra that collapsed his liquidity, forcing a sudden and public bankruptcy, which in turn caused the church to have to purchase all that property that Khashoggi was building the Triad Center on. So they bailed out Adnan Khashoggi, the CIA arms dealer. Okay. Now, was the church involved with the Central Intelligence Agency? Absolutely. I have a 1984 document that says Office of Personnel Representatives traveled to Brigham Young University to recruit and meet with senior officials of the Mormon Church to discuss agency recruitment of church members. The church indicated its endorsement of the agency's mission and its elders plan to meet and address any concerns about our recruiting effort and its possible undercutting of the church's image. So not only were church leaders endorsing the mission of the church, they understood that the recruitment of church members into the Central Intelligence Agency could undercut the church's image, which it did when we found out that the man creating torture programs for the Central Intelligence Agency was a Mormon bishop. When we found out that the judge who approved those torture programs was a Mormon judge. They were right to be concerned about it, because anytime that people learn about the fact that it was Mormons in the Central Intelligence Agency who were responsible for the torture of God's children, it certainly undercuts the church's image. But despite that, they move forward and continue to tie themselves to that organization, which I consider probably one of the most corrupt organizations on the face of the earth in the last 2 centuries.
Evil. I mean, what they've done with MK Ultra, it's in the news right now. It's in Congress right now. The mind control, the torturing of people. And what
Kathy O'Brien.
Kathy O'Brien came on and talked about how the Romneys, George Romney was deeply involved with that, and it being introduced into the church. So you can clearly see all the ties here. Yeah, it's very concerning when, especially the CIA. Who was it that said, "We'll know our mission is complete when everything that the people believe is a lie"? Something along those lines. We'll put this quote up here. I mean, this is who the CIA is. They are an organization that's done untold damage to humanity, and when our own church is so involved with these evil organizations, and I know some of our people and a lot of people out there have a hard time with us having these conversations, like for somehow, I mean, this is why we're such a cult, and I'll say it, we're a cult. We are a cult when you can't think for yourself and say, wait, these things don't add up to me. Like, this isn't saying right to my brain. But if you're in a cult and you hear these things and it's all logic, I mean, you haven't said anything here that's this is all documented. But if you're in a cult, you turn away because it breaks your thinking. And so rather than your whole paradigm being changed and maybe there's something wrong there, you just turn away and put your head in the sand and say all is well in Zion, then I'm just going to look away and don't listen, and that's evil. And that's why I think it's so concerning what's happened here in Utah. Because people should be concerned. Like, this matters to me. This should matter to every single person alive, especially if this is happening in your church. All the more reason. And I'm pretty sure God is not okay with this. In fact, I think God is probably a little upset at the weak men and women in his church who sit and hide and run away and refuse to see the evil that is there.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to talk about next is where it goes from concerning to me to like mathematically impossible, and where we have to really ask ourselves the question that you just brought up, which is this pleasing to God? And I'm just going to go through this as quickly as I can. But if you look at a list of the apostles from number 82 to 94, okay, so that's like the 82nd apostle to the 94th apostle. 7 of those men were secret society members. David Haight, Russell Nelson, Dallin Oaks, M. Russell Ballard, Joseph Worthland, Robert D. Hales, and David Bednar were all secret society members. So what you end up with is a quorum of the 12 apostles that looks exactly like a Skull and Bones chapter at the University of Utah. You've got multiple Sigma Chi members. You've got a couple Pi Kappa Alpha guys. Then you have Neil A. Maxwell, who was a employee of the Central Intelligence Agency, and James E. Faust, who presided over the Cottonwood Stake, which has the highest concentration of secret society members of any stake in the world. It's where all the Sigma Chi guys empty out to, and they all live around each other and they give each other favors. And that's the stake that James E. Faust was over. So you have 7 that were directly parts of the secret societies, and 9 out of the 12 that are tangentially attached to groups of people that you just really have to start questioning. Is this possible? And what I'm going to tell you is that, so like for my career, I build models. I do statistics and I'm in analytics. So I built what's called an apostle selection simulation. It's a stochastic model. And all it is you take a group of people and you create what's called a tagged cohort. And it could be left-handed people, it can be blue-eyed people, or it can be people who are members of secret societies. And I know the number of people that were in secret societies. And what I can tell you is that through like random operation, this makeup of the quorum of the 12 is never going to happen naturally. Never. Through random selection, you're never going to have this many people in the quorum of the 12 that were fraternity members. In fact, you're far more likely to have 9 left-handed, blue-eyed members of the quorum of the 12 than you are to have fraternity members as members of the quorum of the 12. Okay.
Wow.
So I've run this model a couple hundred times now, and not once do you have this many members. So the question becomes, does God favor men who partake of the Black Supper and say, so mote it be, and are parts of patronage networks and put on black robes to partake of the Black Supper? Like, are those the kinds of people that God favors and calls
rituals,
and engage in humiliation rituals and physically abuse each other? Are those the kinds of men, treat men? Yeah, all those things. Does God favor those men? Or did some of those men make their way into the quorum of the 12 and then start calling each other outside of inspiration and revelation? And that's a really dangerous question to have to ask, but I think it has to be asked because mathematically it is literally impossible for this type of quorum to form through random selection. It has to be through revelation or through some other agent, right, forming the quorum in this matter. Okay.
And I'm going to take it a step further and just say the quiet part out loud. Of that list you just had pulled up, the highlighted members are the ones we've had
more than the highlighted, all of them but one.
Well,
we've heard
as it
multiple
relates
people
specifically
to
to
ritual
this.
abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this is really the crux. This is the moment in this show that everybody needs to stop it, put it on pause, and really think about what was said. Like 7 out of 12 men in the quorum of the 12, a mathematically impossible number through random selection, became members of the highest governing bodies of the church. And we know exactly what they were doing as young men, because you're required to do all those things that we just covered. And then what we see moving forward is stuff like the Pace memo. And who are the ones that are looking at ritual abuse? It's James Faust and Russell M. Nelson. Do you want CIA loving Sigma Chi guys investigating your ritual abuse? I personally would not. I would rather have somebody else looking at the Pace memorandum than people who are in bed with the Central Intelligence Agency and Sigma Chi. Okay, that's a personal preference that I have. They're also
again-
breaking the law. Go ahead.
And again, once they had the Glenn Pace memo, once they knew that there was a problem within the church of not just humiliation rituals, but rampant ritual abuse in those horrific ways, just like what goes on with MK Ultra. Again, the ties between the ritual abuse in the church and MK Ultra, which uses ritual abuse to, it just becomes too much of how do you not see it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, along with those things, you've got Ensign Peak, where the Brethren and the First Presidency are breaking the law. Okay. They are breaking the law with Ensign Peak. They're taking your tithing money and they're putting it into security bonds. They're called bonds for a reason because it's debt. So they're basically betting on debt. Okay. So they're breaking the law. They're hurting abuse victims. They're wresting the scriptures. Just this week, Connor Boyack put out a show where he noticed that they have been changing the definition of apostasy, which is something I wrote about 2 years ago. And that's exactly what happened. As these secret society men took over the church, they changed the definition of apostasy to an abandonment of the faith to what? To not sustaining the secret society brethren. So now if they do something and you don't like it, you are now an apostate and they kick you out of the church.
Or have you threatened to be arrested for showing up at church?
That's right. Or they trespass you. That's exactly right. Okay. So, but is that appropriate? Is that what God wanted? Or is that what secret society members wanted? Then you start seeing things like the church in Armenia collapsing. So John Huntsman is a Sigma Chi member that gave a lot of favors to Sigma Chi church leaders, like using his jet. And somebody wrote in the comments that he wasn't just loaning it to them, he was using the cost of giving them the jet as his tithing or something like that. And I don't have time to have that conversation, but the point is that Sigma Chi Huntsman is doing favors for his secret society brethren who are leading the church. And then guess who gets called as one of the next apostles? Ronald Rasband, who went to Armenia with John Huntsman and set up where the church grew for a long time. But as soon as John Huntsman got sick and was about ready to die, the church in Armenia collapsed. Why did it collapse? Well, according to this returned missionary, it says, not my own experience, but a returned missionary shared with our congregation that the Armenian version of the mafia was using the church as a front for all of their organization. Okay. And I think that's plausible. I think it's plausible that there was an earthquake in Armenia and a bunch of Sigma Chi guys got together and they made a ton of money going into Armenia. And then part of that was that Armenian mafia was using the church as a cover. And when their patron, John Huntsman, is ready to pass away, the church in Armenia completely collapses. They had a stake and it went down to 3 branches. Okay, so these are the fruits of what's happening. Then, of course, you have a literal godsend, and you have Sigma Chi, Russell M. Nelson, who's all in on things like Rotary International. His dad was the president of Rotary International. Okay, and so like you have him saying things like, we need to put this literal godsend into our body in order to be quote unquote good global citizens. Okay, I think that probably has a lot to do with the networks that he was a part of, giving him direction. And because he couldn't get out of Sigma Chi, because it's a death oath, you now have to play by their games because they know all the things that you've done. They know all the compromises that you've made as you've gone from Sigma Chi to Skull and Bones to whatever, to whatever, to whatever. And now you're in a position when one of those brethren come to you and they give you that secret handshake that President Monson gave George W. Bush. And George Bush says, hey, we're going to have this pandemic and everybody needs to partake of these vaccines in order to be good global citizens. You have to go out and parrot that, even if it's irrespective of if it's what God wants you to say, you have to say it because you're a part of a patronage network that knows all of the shame bonding and humiliation rituals that you've taken part of.
One step further, you're going to have the chance to invest in these vaccine companies.
That's
And
right.
make a lot of money when this
Right.
happens. It's wrong.
That's
It's
right.
all wrong.
Yeah, and by the time you've made all those compromises, I mean, so one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, did any of these men repent? But I think the problem is when you have 7 of 12, did all 7 repent? And if they did, how come none of them have ever given a talk in general conference telling about the mistakes they made in the humiliation rituals that they took a part of and warned the young men of the church to stay away from these organizations? Instead, you have the Cottonwood stake where men like Marcus Pinnock, who was the bishop in Gordon Bowen's excommunication, encouraging the young men in young men activities, church activities, encouraging them to join Sigma Chi. Okay, I have multiple sources from that stake who tell me about when Marcus Pinnock was a young men's leader, he would encourage the young men to join Sigma Chi because he was the president of Sigma Chi. And so when Gordon Bowen comes around, right, and everybody knows about Gordon Bowen at this point, but when Gordon Bowen, when it comes time for him to be excommunicated, the bishop is Sigma Chi, the stake president is Sigma Chi, the apostle who's been doing business with Gordon Bowen for 30 years at that point is Sigma Chi, and the president of the church, well, no, Russell Nelson wasn't Sigma Chi yet, but you see the problem here. You've got an apostle who's been doing things that he shouldn't be doing with a sexual predator by the name of Gordon Bowen, and all this stuff starts leaking out, and that apostle is telling the abuse victims, hey, you can't tell anybody about this because we need this abuser to help us improve the image of the church. And so he gets his Sigma Chi stake president brother and his Sigma Chi bishop to excommunicate him quietly. But I would bet you anything, if you called Curtin McConkie and could pry open those records, I bet you anything they didn't call Curtin McConkie and report him as a pedophile or contact authorities to let them know that 4 children had been abused and 2 adult men had been abused. Why? Because they need to keep their secrets, and they've created an environment in their life where they're willing to make those compromises. The relationship between Gordon Bowen and the brethren in the Church of Jesus Christ over the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints over the last 40 years is nothing but one compromise after another. It's one compromise after another. And unfortunately, what they ended up compromising is the well-being of multiple abuse victims, which is highly objectionable in my world because I happen to care about these victims. So I say it this way, and then we're going to wrap up with a conclusion. I look at it this way. We're told that these men are supposed to be our shepherds and that they're supposed to take care of the flock. But what we find is a bunch of secret society men who compromised and engaged in humiliation rituals and shame bonding, and then tying themselves to organizations like Rotary International, the Central Intelligence Agency. And whenever a sheep gets out of order, they take that sheep and they toss them over the fence because it doesn't meet their goals anymore, which I'm just not sure are the same goals that God has for us. Because my understanding is that God wants us to build Zion, not a $350 billion corporation, but Zion. And I can't be of one heart and one mind with men who've engaged in the types of behaviors that these men have. And for me, like, other people might find other things objectionable, but for me, the most objectionable thing is the way that they treat abuse victims as human resource problems instead of children of God who need their love and assistance and the healing power that comes from the atonement of Jesus Christ. And that's where I stand. And that's where, like, that's a hill that I'm willing to die on. And I might be wrong and I might be right. And some people have started pointing out, Justin, like, you're becoming influential. And if you drag people away from the church, you're going to be held responsible for this. And I am not here to drag people away from the church, but I am here to ask people to use their minds to look at the historical evidence and decide for themselves whether these men are building Zion or whether they are building a multinational corporation that benefits them and their secret society brethren. I think it's a critical question for every member of the church to ask themselves at this particular moment in history. Okay?
Justin, very powerful. Very powerful. Any final thoughts before I turn it to Alexia?
Yeah, I just want to run through a couple things very, very quickly. So the question is, are they corrupt or compromised? I think at the lowest levels, they're just compromised, but they become more and more corrupt the more compromises they make. We know from the scriptures that there is nothing covered which shall not be revealed. Everybody can look that up, okay? It's in your scriptures. There's nothing covered, including Sigma Chi rituals, that will not be revealed. And I think that today we've revealed some of those things that they've tried to cover. Also in our scriptures, it talks about the sinners in Zion being afraid. Okay, this is in Isaiah. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Okay, and if I had to describe Sigma Chi, Pi Kappa Alpha, Skull and Bones, Allen Key, CIA, Rotary International, United Nation members of the church, the number one word I would use is hypocrites. And in my opinion, they are what the church calls chanef, okay, in the word in Hebrew. And what that word means, that's the word that's used in that Isaiah scripture. What that word means is morally soiled. And if I had to say it in a couple words, I believe that not all the men and women who joined these organizations, but many of the men who joined these organizations who ended up in positions of power, influence, and gain inside of business, government, and ecclesiastical structures are morally soiled individuals, and they need to repent. The last thing that I have to say, it goes back to what you said, which is when somebody comes to me and asks me, what can I do? Here's my new answer. And this is again the standard. It comes from our standard works. And when the people in the Book of Mormon found themselves in similar positions to this, here's what they said. Therefore, we did pour out our souls in prayer to God, that he would strengthen us and deliver us out of the hands of our enemies, yea, and also give us strength that we might retain our cities and our lands and our possessions for the support of our people. Yea, and it came to pass that the Lord our God did visit us with assurances that he would deliver us. Yea, insomuch that he did speak peace to our souls, and did grant unto us great faith, and did cause us that we should hope for our deliverance in him. So if you want to ask me what we need to do, we need to pour out our souls in prayer to God that he will deliver us from our enemies so that we can receive that same gift that these people did and have peace in our souls and great faith, knowing that God will deliver us from those who have put us in this position. And I guess that's where I end today.
Very powerful. Alexia?
No, Justin, I just want to thank you for coming on and putting that all together for us, Professor Briggs, I should say. Um, it's always nice to build on some of these past episodes, especially some of the ones we'll link below, and even the ones you've done on other platforms. I'm grateful you're spreading your in wealth of information across not just our platform but multiple platforms. So I think as I'm coming to understand this more because I'm trying to learn alongside our viewers, I mean, you see these clear patterns holding about these rituals, whether we're talking about fraternities or we're talking about survivor accounts. And then we're also looking at these networks that prioritize control and loyalty and silence over accountability. So, from looking at all of these stories, I'm going to fall into a Constantine rabbit hole later on as I study more on that symbolism that was fascinating to me. And then looking to more modern day, like Utah power institutions and the church, the result is too often on protection of the perps at victims' expenses. And it's good to weave the ties to the origin. And this is really the origin of where a lot of these secret societies come from of ancient times. So thank you for sharing this wealth with us and piecing more of it together with us. So thank you, Justin.
Yeah. To our audience, these things are hard. This is hard. It's been hard for Alexia and I. I know it's been hard for Justin. I know it's hard for you. And when people run into us at the store, I always say, "Oh, follow you guys." My heart hurts for you because this is not easy. This is not fun. These are things we don't want to be true. But at the other end of this, real people are being affected. If you didn't watch the show that came out last week with Tom Stallings and Michael Jensen, 50 children, 50 children. If you were living in that neighborhood, it most likely would have been one of your kids. Lives ruined forever. Families' lives ruined forever. While at every level, the church protected the the son of a high-profile family member in the church or family in the church. They put him, that predator, ahead of your children. We've spoken with over 100, probably 120 victims of horrific abuse. Glenn Pace talked about the problem. The church media that they own covers up all the corruption in this state, all the corruption of your politicians. The church is funding every bad agenda out there. I know these are not things that anyone wants to see, anyone wants to look at, but it matters. It matters to me. Maybe I'm different, but I don't think so. But God did not give me a heart that can sit and look the other way when I know these things are happening, when I know kids are being hurt, and I know I'm not the only one. I would encourage you to go watch this video again. I'd go encourage you to watch other videos. I would encourage you to listen to your own heart, your own mind, your own soul. God gave you a mind. He gave you a heart, the ability to reason and think, and just does what you're learning, which is factual. The church's law firm. I mean, we know this. We know what's going on with Curtin McConkie. Curtin McConkie. I'm not even professional. I'm just here trying to figure things out with all of us, right? That's what we should be doing, is doing our best. You don't need to be professional to get out and try to take a stance. We know when this investigator from the Department of Homeland Security was investigating David Hamblin, and as he went and started seeing all the horrific things that were adding up with the ritual abuse, including David Levitt, as soon as he went to subpoena the church's hotline to find out who else has been calling up, higher ups in the church attacked him and spent $2 million trying to dig up dirt on him and blackmail him and get him out of the agency. He's gone. The CIA, all of these things, like, does this sound like the way God does things? And let alone people like us who've never questioned the doctrine. We just stood for children, and yet this church threatens us with arrest if we simply want to go and worship on Sunday. See, the thing is, this is a podcast on one level. But this is far more than a podcast, because each of you on the other end, this means something to you. Because if these things are true, the question is, what does that mean to you? If this, then what? And the reality is, no one wants to face the then what. We'd rather keep our head in the sand and say, let's just keep living life as we want it to be. But there is a world out there. There is a darkness out there. There is horrific things happening. Again, MK Ultra, it's not conspiracy. And again, where did the name conspiracy come from? The CIA invented it after they assassinated Kennedy. But no one knows that because you've been brainwashed. There is real evil out there. We are exposing it. It is in your backyard. And the question is, if these things are true, if what Justin revealed about these secret combinations, these secret organizations are true, what does that mean? Because the thing that no one wants to face is it means you have a responsibility to do something. And people come to us and say, Jason, what is it? What should I do? What should I do? And, go to Justin, what should I do? Well, I'm going to tell you the same thing I've said before. This is God's fight. We are living in biblical times. The evil we are talking about, the Epstein-Level abuse, which is a fact. This ritualized, horrific abuse that is happening in our capital and our backyards is happening, whether you want to admit it or not. There is two sides here. There is good, there is evil. The line is in the sand. And I think what makes this very unnerving for people is you're being forced to choose a side, to take a stance, to leave neutral ground, to get off the fence. Who do you stand with? Do you stand with children? Do you stand with defending the innocents? Do you stand against this evil? Or are you going to fight against those who are exposing this? Fight against the survivors? Or are you just going to sit on the fence and stay neutral? But the fact of the matter is, a line is in the sand, and this line and this divide will get further. And at one day, whether in this life or the next, everyone will know that this was the central issue of our day, the trafficking of children. The same evil that has gone on since the days of the Israelites, passing their fires through the children through the fires. God loves children, and he honors them and blesses them. The enemy wants to destroy them. This is God's fight. And if your heart feels compelled, which I don't know how you can, watch this and know about these things and not be compelled to take a stance and do something. You don't go to someone like me and say, what should I do, Jason? You don't go to Justin. You turn to the captain of this. You turn to God and ask God why he sent you. Because I believe that God sent certain men and women to lay the foundation of this country, and they weren't there on coincidence. And I believe the time we are in now is every bit, if not even more significant than those times. And I do not believe God sent his second string for this battle. And I'll tell you if it's not you who has eyes to see, who he has a calling for, a responsibility, who's been anointed, who is it? Because it can't be the person with his head in the sand who refuses to believe that there is evil and that all is well in Zion. I don't know. Alexia and I are not always going to be here. That's something it's obviously clear. And this is not our fight anyways. It's not our fight. We're just two people who see something who refuse to sit silently, and we're getting all hell come against us for it. But the fact of the matter is, we know there's a problem. And I think there's a problem if you've watched this with honest heart. The question is, what are you willing to do? What are you going to do? And I don't know, you don't need to have the answer, but I think it's something that we probably should spend some time on our knees on, understanding what our role is. Because gone are the days when you can just sit back and say, I'm going to trust and follow somebody who's going to lead me, and I'm just going to obey authority and follow the line of authority up, like these men did in the Michael Stallings case. They refused to report to the police. Like what happens in almost every one of these Utah cults. Everyone refuses. Everyone is looking for a leader to follow. You saw the leader of Nelson, who told you to go get the jab and called it a literal godsend. And I have no faith. I believe these men have infiltrated. They are not who they appear to be. I will say it. I've talked to enough survivors. I believe they are telling the truth. I believe there is evil in this church, and I'm going to say it. And I've paid the price to believe it and to see it. A price any one of you could pay by just sitting and listening to survivors, listening through these things, opening your eyes to see the truth. But the problem is, with that knowledge comes a responsibility to do something with it, or else that knowledge turns to your damnation. And that is why people want to turn away and shun this stuff, is because they don't want the responsibility that comes with it. And I understand that, because it has been a massive responsibility for us and a massive sacrifice. And I don't think God's asking you to do what we've been compelled to do. But I don't think you were sent to this life to live a life of meaninglessness. It says, live like the Pharisees, with your head in the sand, being so impressed with your good works that you don't drink a damn cup of coffee. Anyways, I just want to thank Justin. I know he's paid a high price. He's been excommunicated for standing and calling out the violence of children and protecting and asking for accountability. And I think God holds a high place for someone like that. I'm thankful for my wife, for everything she goes through. She goes through literally hell. She's been through hell, going through what we're going through. And I'm thankful for those survivors who have gone through hell, literally, and have been willing to stand and show the people what is happening. The Epstein-Level stuff that is happening in your backyard. And my heart goes out to all of you who are willing to do something more than just put your head in the sand and wish for nicer days or wish these things weren't true. But the fact of the matter is this: our lives are short. They're all going to come to an end. And when it comes to an end and we are on the other side, nothing will matter. Nothing will matter. your job, how good you look, how much money you made. None of that will matter more than when you lived in the days that had been prophesied since the dawn of time, the time that we live in. What did you do? What was it like to be on the earth to see when Epstein stuff was going on? When there was the chaos, when there was the darkness, when you saw the corruption in the church? What did you do? And that is the answer that you are deciding today. And by the decisions we make today, we will live with those decisions for eternity. And I honor anyone who will stand on the right side of that fight. So anyways, thank you guys. I know these things are hard. I know it's hard watching these things and hearing how dark things are. But guess what? I happen to believe you guys and we were sent for this time. And if we were sent for this time, I think someone's going to get us through it. And sometimes it is going through the darkness. It is suffering with these victims. It is hearing things that are so painful and difficult that force you to go into the dark night of your soul and wrestle with God. And in that process, I believe, is what will prepare us for the days ahead. And those who have not gone through that personal struggling, I feel for them when things come for what is coming. Anyways, thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you for all you do, and we'll see you guys on the next show. Hey, thank you guys. I have just the greatest love for survivors. You know that. And people always ask, Jason, what can we do? What can we do? I stand completely and firmly behind Ashley Smith and her organization, Still Waters Healing Foundation. I'm going to have her share a little bit of what she's doing, and we're going to encourage you to help her as she reaches out to help these incredible survivors in their healing.
I'm the founder and director of Still Waters Healing Foundation, and as an SRA survivor myself, I created this space for survivors of sexual abuse, SRA, and human sex trafficking, where they can find healing and safety and stillness inside community. The heart of the foundation is found in Psalms chapter 23, and we learned there that even though these survivors have walked through the valley of the shadow of death, the Lord can restore their souls and lead them beside still waters. With this heart of the foundation, we teach survivors to bring stillness back into their bodies, to their nervous system, to their minds, their emotions, and ultimately their soul, with safe support and in community. We begin with our Open Waters monthly in-person gatherings where survivors experience nervous system education, somatic healing, and practical tools to empower their healing to help them move forward in their journey. We're expanding our trusted network of professionals, offering a range of healing modalities and therapies so each survivor can find what truly supports their individual journey as well as their community healing. And from there, we move into deeper programs and an immersive retreats with our first retreat coming this fall, where we spend 3 days going into deeper healing. And our website is stillheals.org, and this is where you can join or donate.
Ash, you're awesome. Thank you for doing that. And I'm going to ask you guys, you are so incredible. Our audience does so much to fight and stand on for this battle of light and dark. I know you guys are generous. You've been so generous with us, with Alexia and I, especially with our lawsuit, and we have the greatest love and appreciation for all of your sacrifices. I am going to ask you to make a sacrifice and help Ashley and her organization. I believe in her. I believe that this is why she is on this earth. I believe this is why she has been rescued from what she has been through, is so that she can lead this effort. And so I'm going to ask you, please go to her website, make a donation, help her make a difference and be part of the transforming of some of these incredible lives of these individuals and helping them heal. Thank you guys so much.